Hello. Thanks for joining me again. We have another rather important live stream to discuss. We're going to be discussing the famous rape gangs of the UK, the grooming gangs, as they were long known. This is something that's been going on for a very, very long time, but it only came out. It started making the news maybe a decade ago or 2 decades ago. People on the ground, of course, knew about it, but it only started becoming kind of known maybe 15 years ago. Well, that's when I started hearing about it anyway, and I'm involved in this field. But a big mega report, a big beautiful bill, just came out called the Rape Gang Inquiry Report, right here, which I've printed out, and rather comprehensive, discusses the situation very thoroughly, gives numerous examples, anecdotes, lots of important statistics. And like I said, this is something that I've been familiar with and writing about for probably 15 years. This is when I first started writing about this. I have many articles out there, and I've been writing some more on my Substack. And I'm going to be writing some more based on this report and others. And what I wanted to do today is just go through this report. I actually read it, so you don't have to. And I marked up a lot of the most important points, including things that people may not think are important, and that I wanted to sort of shed light on. So we'll go through it as fast as I can. We'll go through as much as I can. I wanted to do a very thorough stream about this very topic, but it's so big, it's so complex, it's so multifaceted, because we're going to have to look at not just the facts, but the Islamic connection. So as you can see, there's many variables involved. There's the actual news. There's the actual phenomena itself, which we'll be looking at primarily today through this report. The statistics, the facts, what's really going on. And if we can get to it, we'll try to actually also delve into the Islamic connection. But that one is so comprehensive, and one that I know so well. I think maybe we'll put that for a part two after we flesh out the problem today. Okay. But we'll see. And also, somewhere or other, we might have a guest joining us from Vienna, Austria, who knows a whole lot about this. Okay. So let's do it. What I'm going to do is, like I told you, I've read this report, and I'm now just going to go through it and read certain portions. And I'm going to start by actually reading the entire executive summary, because it's very important. And obviously, it's that's what it is. It's an executive summary. It essentially tells you everything you need to know, the heart of it, and then we'll look at the examples and the other matters. All right, so here it is, the executive summary. I may stop within it, make observations, as is my wont and custom, and but I'll let you know when it's the actual words of the report and when I'm talking, if not self-evident. Okay, here we go. This is page 7, executive summary. The rape gang inquiry examined the systematic targeting of vulnerable girls, overwhelmingly white British, by predominantly Muslim Pakistani gangs across towns and cities throughout the United Kingdom. The rape report being this one. The evidence put to the inquiry confirms that this scandal constitutes one of the most horrendous failures in the history of the country. And when we get done with it, you'll see that this is no exaggeration. Organized networks of perpetrators built coordinated operations that transported victims between locations, supplied them with drugs and alcohol, recorded abuse for distribution and blackmail, and passed girls between multiple adult men. These crimes have been committed for decades, since the 1950s, by Pakistanis in particular, and have affected every region of our country. The scales of the crimes committed is staggering. Yes, it is. It has been previously established that at the very least 250,000 young white girls have been subjected to repeated rape, gang rape, trafficking, torture, pregnancy, forced Islamic conversion, and of course, lifelong trauma. The true number is probably higher. The perpetrators bear primary responsibility, yet the institutional failures that enabled them for decades must also be confronted. In court records and official inquiries, around 80% of those convicted in these group based child sexual exploitation cases bore distinctively Muslim names. 87%. The vast majority of men involved in these gangs were not convicted. Dr. Taj Hargay, an imam with the Oxford Islamic Congregation, believes the true proportion of gang members who are Muslims to be around 95%. I agree. This figure far exceeds the share of the overall United Kingdom population. The overwhelming majority of the rape gang networks consisted entirely of men from Muslim backgrounds, predominantly of Pakistani heritage, although smaller groups from Somalia, from Somali, Iranian, Syrian, Turkish, and other Muslim origins were also involved. The inquiry heard harrowing testimony from survivors and their families. The method used to groom children typically followed the same process. And here it is. Quote, the girls as young as 11 were initially befriended by a young Muslim man who then treated the young child like an adult and would then start providing them with alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. After a few months, the girls would then be collected from school gates, care homes, and streets in taxis. They were taken to houses, flats, restaurants, and hotels where they were raped repeatedly by groups of men, tortured, filmed for blackmail, and told they were white trash or kuffar. That's the Islamic term for non-Muslims, very derogatory. I usually translate it as infidel, who merited punishment. Many became pregnant while still children. Some miscarried under trauma. Others endured coerced abortions, and some gave birth to children who were later removed by the state. We found that the same unspeakable crimes occurred in at least 149 local authority districts, close to 40% of all such districts across the United Kingdom. Survivors described daily rapes, red rooms of extreme torture, trafficking between cities, and institutional disbelief that compounded their suffering. Some girls were even trafficked to the Middle East, where they would endure Islamic marriage. The demographic and cultural drivers are clear. Perpetrators from Pakistani Muslim and other Muslim backgrounds operated under an honor and shame-based clan code that treated non-Muslim girls, especially white working-class girls, as property available for sexual use. This pattern was reinforced by 8 theological and legal aspects of Islam. These include the doctrine of Muslim superiority, drawn from Quranic verses that position Muslims at the top, with a duty to correct non-believers. The gang members' justification for their crimes can be found in the Islamic principles of loyalty and disavowal, known as al-wala wal-bara. I like to think that I'm the one who made this term very popular because I wrote about it a lot back in 2006. And it came out, I included an entire treatise of it in my book, The Al-Qaeda Reader, which came out in 2007. And I've long maintained this is one of the most problematic doctrines in all of Islam. So we will get to that. And here they translated it as loyalty and disavowal. So, okay, let me continue. The gang members' justification for their crimes can be found in the Islamic principles of loyalty and disavowal known as al-wala wal-bara. It demands enmity towards non-Muslims, the superiority of men over women, forced marriage combined with the absence, this doctrine does demand enmity towards non-Muslims, but I don't think it demands superiority over men over women. That is part of Islam, but it's not part of al-wala wal-bara. Just to be clear. So the superiority of men over women, yeah, that's Islamic. Forced marriage combined with the absence of any fixed minimum age of consent. The perception of female sexuality as inherently dangerous. A system of sex slavery that authorizes sexual relations with non-Muslim captives, and a religiously sanctioned social hierarchy that subjugates conquered non-Muslims. These elements, filtered through clannish immigrant subcultures, provided religious justification that enabled the systematic rape and even slaughter of white British girls. Were Britain functioning effectively, these girls would have received considerable state protection. However, every one of our institutions failed them catastrophically. Police forces ignored repeated reports, criminalized victims instead of the perpetrators, destroyed evidence, and allowed known rapists to walk free on bail. Social care services undermined protective parents, placed children in trafficking hubs inside children's homes, closed cases despite clear indicators of exploitation, and retaliated against whistleblowers. The NHS recorded genital injuries, multiple sexually transmitted infections in children as young as 13, pregnancies caused by rape, and suicide attempts, yet discharged victims back to their abusers without safeguarding referrals or trauma care. Schools observed older men collecting girls at the gates, heard disclosures of rape on school premises, and responded by excluding victims rather than protecting them. Taxi licensing authorities renewed permits for drivers who formed the logistical backbone of the networks, and collapsed in the face of organized protests when basic safety measures were proposed. Political failures lie at the heart of the scandal. Successive governments lacked the will to confront the ethnic and religious patterns. The Labour Party bears particular responsibility. It initially refused a public inquiry and only relented under pressure by ordering a process viewed with widespread skepticism. Labour-dominated councils and MPs were briefed on the gangs long ago, yet later denied knowledge. The party prioritized electoral reliance on Muslim voting blocs and then blocked or watered down inquiries, suppressed ethnicity data, and framed legitimate concerns as far-right agitation. When finally forced to act, the Labour government produced a national inquiry whose tightly drawn terms of reference deliberately excluded systematic examination of the demographic, cultural, and religious drivers. To summarize what this means, the Labour Party did everything possible to say this isn't happening, and when the evidence was overwhelming and they had to begrudgingly somehow cooperate, even then they went out of their way to conceal data dealing with the demographics, the race, the ethnicity, and the religion of the people doing all this, these gang rapes and grooming gangs. Now, I continue, quote, the Conservative Party, while in government, continued with Labour's approach and failed to impose mandatory ethnicity recording or launch a full statutory inquiry despite clear evidence from Rotherham and elsewhere. Scottish political parties have refused a dedicated inquiry and failed to record offender ethnicity. Political correctness, fear of accusations of racism, and fear of losing electoral support from certain demographics have taken precedence over the protection of British children. Whistleblowers, parents, and survivors who came forward showed extraordinary courage, despite having been met in the past with disbelief and intimidation. We're almost done. The perpetrators operated with impunity because the state enabled them. The evidence now demands immediate and decisive action to eradicate the problem, deliver justice for the victims, and ensure these abhorrent crimes are eradicated from our shores. We now have a clearer sense of the problem. There are a number of measures necessary to resolve them, up to and including considerable changes to our criminal justice system, the passage of legislation aimed at targeting specifically gang-based CSE, and a great amount of institutional overhaul. Our detailed list of recommendation includes improved data recording on ethno-religious patterns among offenders, far stronger sentencing, a comprehensive deportation effort, institutional accountability measures, multi-agency coordination, specialist training, enhanced safeguarding through greater family involvement, and closing the various gaps in British law through which so many victims fell. Following the publication of this report, we intend to release the full witness testimonies, gather additional survivor accounts, identify those responsible in Parliament, and begin civil and private legal actions to ensure maximal accountability. Okay, that was the executive summary. So what do you make of that? Now, I think it's very clear, obviously, but like I said, I'm well acquainted with everything they're talking about. So now I will put it in a layman's term, if you will, again, about what's been going on. And then we will continue by reading some more and going through other aspects. But this, like I said, is the executive summary. And then the next thing, the next section, which we'll briefly look at, is the overview of the crimes. And then there's the anecdotes and testimonials. And much more. So that's why I said we might not be able to do the whole thing today. Okay, so basically what's been going on is in the United Kingdom, ever since, and we'll see. Actually, maybe I should read this now. Yeah, let me read this quick now. There's a little section called the overview of the crimes, which follows the executive summary, and it's connected. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read some areas that I marked up. So here are some overview of the crimes. Quote: the independent chair of the Center for Excellence for Children's Care and Protection, Alexis J., has identified the 1970s as the decade when immigrant rape gangs first began tormenting the girls of Britain. However, the British newspaper archive reveals that the first recorded case of specifically Pakistani rape gangs dates back to 1955. Okay, so 80 years ago. No, 70 years ago. 71, if my math is correct. It dates back to 1955 when 4 Bradford-based Pakistanis were charged with raping a 15-year-old girl from Middlesbrough. This was soon after former colonial subjects. Okay, never mind. These horrific crimes have only escalated in recent decades, especially following Tony Blair's 1997 victory and the start of orchestrated mass immigration. The authorities at every level, including the police, social services, health services, schools, licensing bodies, and politicians, knew the patterns, possessed the intelligence, and still failed to protect the country's children. The evidence establishes that a national scandal of repeated rape, trafficking, torture, pregnancy, forced Islamic conversion, and lifelong trauma enabled by institutional denial, political calculation, and fear of the accusation of racism took place over decades. The incidents of criminal activities listed in this report are drawn from court records, official and unofficial inquiries across the country, and witness testimony provided to the inquiry. They confirm that this was never a series of isolated local failures. It was a coordinated, nationwide pattern of organized child sexual exploitation that repeated in town after town, city after city, from the far north to the south coast. The same ethnic and religious profile of the perpetrators was documented throughout almost all of the witnesses who contacted the inquiry. All right. And later on, yeah, and then it talks a little bit about, this is important, talks about London. And it basically, the report calls London's the epicenter of institutional denial in the grooming gangs. Okay. And it's also one of the worst places where it's happening. And it also happens to have a Muslim Pakistani mayor, Sadiq Khan. It's almost like surreal what the British people are just, putting themselves through. I know it's your leaders, but still. Now Sadiq Khan, has repeatedly insisted there were no grooming gangs operating in the city. It's never happened. You're just Islamophobes. As our inquiry heard from Susan Hall, a leader of the Conservatives in the London Assembly, the rape gang phenomena is in fact endemic within the capital, London. Okay. A Daily Express investigation revealed that Khan had direct access to HM Inspectorate of Constabulary documents detailing exactly these patterns of offending. He read the files, yet continued to deny the existence of grooming gangs. Okay. That's your Muslim Pakistani mayor of London covering up for his fellow Muslim Pakistani citizens of London. In case you're not following. And it might get hard because here's the one sentence that is saying this, actually. London has the largest Muslim population in Britain. Khan relies on significant electoral support from those communities, as well as having an ethno-religious motive to protect the public reputation of Pakistani Muslims in particular. In other words, your Muslim Pakistani mayor, among other reasons, has an ethno-religious motive. These are my people. So, of course, I'm going to cover up for what they're doing to your British girls. All right. This is London. You see what I'm talking about? I must now opine a little bit, and then we'll go on because I find this amazing. It's like I said, the only way to describe what's happening is surreal, because it is. It's just this is the sort of thing that is, it's like not even a parody because it's just too insane. So to sum up what is going on and what this is all about. Since, as it says, the earliest recorded, meaning it was happening before that, but maybe not recorded, is 1955. You had a Pakistani grooming gang, not a random Pakistani who raped or molested, a grooming gang, by which is meant this is an organized gang that each one has a role. There's the guy that there's the taxi driver. His job is to pick up girls and act like they're friends. There's a month or two of grooming them by buying them food and alcohol and cigarettes and acting like you're their friend and not doing anything sexual until you win over their confidences. There's all these phases and there's all these different roles you will see if you go through this report that all these different Muslim men take on. And what is it? It's essentially a business to have sex, and you'll see in these accounts some of these women or girls were raped by multiple men on the same day, same couple of hours, and some of them they pay the ringleaders. So it's not only just for themselves, but it's an actual booming, thriving, I guess, pimp like business right there in London, right there in Britain by these Pakistanis and Muslims in general. We'll go into it, and it talks about, and it's interesting to note, the report makes abundantly clear this is an overwhelmingly Pakistani phenomenon, but it also makes it abundantly clear that second to that, it's a Muslims in general, and Pakistanis are Muslims. Okay, so it is a Muslim phenomena, though it's being spearheaded by the Pakistanis, and other Muslims are also. And there's some quotes which I'll give you of the different races: Somalis, Arabs, Turks, Iranians. Okay, but the Pakistanis have the largest share, and I'm not sure, is that because of all the Muslim groups in Britain, the Pakistanis are the largest? We'll look into that, but I do know that look, Islam is Islam, and it manifests itself in very similar ways throughout different cultures and peoples and ethnicities and races. So there is the similarities, like in this case, you have the sex, the grooming, the sex, the rape. That's one of the general similarities. But what I do notice is this is a very big, prominent thing, especially in Pakistan. Okay. So so it might be because there's more Pakistanis in the UK than other Muslim groups, but I do also know that this particular abuse of non-Muslim women is really rife in Pakistan. All right, so okay, so again, to summarize, you have these groups, Muslims, primarily Pakistanis, going all the way back to 1955, who have decided that the women, the children of Britain are free game. And there's a reason for that, okay? Let's be honest. It's because when you read this report, and they give all these different testimonies, then the next phase we'll get into is just different women, girls, just witness statements about what has happened. And almost all of them start off in completely broken homes. Oftentimes they're raped and molested by their father, by their mother, by, of course, their mom's boyfriends. So that sets the backstage to all this, and this doesn't justify what is going on. I'm just trying to show you this. This is it creates a very conducive environment for these Muslim gangs to do what they can do. You've heard me say many times that that your problem with Muslims, especially Britain, is not organic. It's self-imposed. It's made by your leaders and your governments. Okay, Muslims are today inherently weak. They can't invade and conquer like they used to. So they are being brought in. They are being enabled. They're being empowered, including in this case, as you'll see, because all the authorities turned the other way. Sometimes they enabled it. Sometimes they were complicit. Okay, so this too, you will see that the background, the upbringing, it's just a failed culture. You find that these girls come from what happened to them by these Muslims and Pakistanis was so normal to them because that's kind of what they were growing up in anyway. All right. So as you can see, it's a symbiotic relationship, which I've said many times before. Yeah, Islam is Islam, does what it does, pretty nasty stuff. But let's put it this way: if Britain's government was hell bent on destroying Britain the way it is, let's say 100 years ago, let's say it was it was Starmer and all these people, and they were doing the same thing, and they brought all these Muslims and Pakistanis, it still wouldn't happen. You know why? Because 100 years ago, those girls would not behave that way. Their parents would care, and there would be a lot of, a lot of interest. So it would not be a fertile situation for Muslims to come and easily prey on these girls with absolute impunity. So you see, once again, uh, whatever the Islamic component is, and it is what it is, and we're going to get into it very deeply. All right. In this case, once again, there's the other element to it, which is homegrown complicity one way or the other. Okay. And okay. And why are all these homes destroyed? Okay. Because they bought the lie. They believed that, they turned their back on reality and faith in God and truth. And they were told, oh, yeah, you can just sleep around. That's great. That's open minded. That's enlightened. And their parents did that. Their grandparents maybe did that. They were born into it. And then you bring an alien culture that's kind of like, oh, lunch. you, you believe that? Okay, come, come. All right. This is what I'm trying to tell you. It's a really bad mix. If this was like just a normal Western nation, everyone's a libertine, but you don't have the Muslims and these migrants, okay, then it would just be a libertine, promiscuous nation, and you probably wouldn't have all the mass rape and the grooming. So that's what I mean. You see how it's like two very bad combinations that you put together, and then one completely preys on the other. I've told you a million times. All right, I give this lion analogy. Let's change it up. I don't know. Let's say rabid dogs, and well, we know how rabid, or okay, they don't have to be rabid. That's harsh. Just vicious Doberman, right? And they're these are wild Doberman. Maybe they are a little rabid, and they're kind of dangerous, and then but you insist to go put them in you put your children with them, and you lock them in a cage when they haven't eaten. And I don't think Doberman's even, this isn't a good analogy, but my point is, you put it with a wild animal and it starts mauling your kid. At one point you have to say, well, it's me doing that, yeah, because I know how this particular animal behaves, so maybe I shouldn't put my kids in front of it, right? And this is again, so once again, I've been saying this over and over in whatever context we discuss, wherever Islam comes up, that, the West needs to take responsibility, because they're exposing themselves, they're enabling this Islamic behavior. And people still want to think, no, Muslims are like, it's the 8th century and they're invading Europe and we need Charles Martel to fight them. No, you need just someone to kick them out, and someone to make rules to say, we don't want you here anymore, and problem solved. Very, very simple. So don't ever lose track or lose sight of that very important fundamental truth, right? Which is, the Muslims are doing whatever, but in this stage, what's happening in Europe is 100% your leader's fault, and that's why you need to keep your eye on those people, the enablers. All right, I digressed. And again, so to summarize, Islamic groups doing what they're doing, preying on these women because they come from broken homes. Like I said, every single account you read, this girl starts off in a really bad situation. Okay, oftentimes, like really, really bad, and that's the source of it. This is how it all started, right? Again, this is not to exonerate the Muslim behavior, because they're taking advantage of it, right? They're exploiting it because you're the enemy. You're just a kafir, like it says. You're just a piece of meat, like they say, as we'll see in this report. So don't make yourself a piece of meat. All right. Anyway, let's move on. So I gave you the executive summary. Now, I'm on page 18. It's over 200 pages. And this is the victim testimony section. And what it is, it has just names of women. I assume they're pseudonyms, and they tell their stories. And I'm not, like I said, they're all so similar. Okay, young girl from a broken home, someone in that home, or several people from that home, father, stepfather, mom's boyfriend, mom, uncle, sexually abused them, molested them, raped them, et cetera, et cetera. They grew up thinking this is normal. And then these Muslims who have a highly intricate and organized type of their grooming gang system identify these women, prey on them, act like they're friends, start plying them with drugs, which to those girls is normal because that's their parents, that's the household they came from, and the Muslims give them that, and next thing you know, they're raping them, passing them around like a piece of meat to their friends, charging money for the pleasure, I suppose, etc., etc. So I'm not going to read to you all of them because, like I said, it's almost boilerplate material. But I will go through some of them and just read a few excerpts because they're kind of relevant and worth pausing and reflecting on. Okay, so this one is Chloe, the first one, and it says, on one occasion, Chloe was abducted by an abuser who was driving drunk and taken to a graveyard. He gave Chloe, still 12 years old, whiskey before forcing himself on her and raping her. He withdrew before ejaculation and forced the empty whiskey bottle into Chloe's vagina, the 12-year-old, where it shattered. Chloe admitted herself to A&E, but no questions were asked about how she had sustained such an injury. She was examined, the glass was removed, and she was discharged. And it repeated again. Okay, so there you see an example of the kind of abuses and the kind of indifference by the system itself. Here again is Chloe. Quote, around the age of 13, Chloe disclosed to social services that she was being sexually abused by gangs of Muslim men. In response, social services did not intervene, but rather talked to Chloe about contraception and sexual health. Okay? Let that sink in. And if you don't get what I'm saying, see, this is why this is happening. All right. Over this period, she was trafficked across the length and breadth of Britain. This is Chloe still. She was taken to, quote, house after house and raped and abused by, quote, guy after guy after guy after guy. The men who abused her paid money to the gang, see, which treated her as little more than a commodity. She was reported missing and her photograph was shown on TV, etc., etc. Okay. And here's a point where she talks about, this is Chloe, that these men, these gangs were so cognizant of the fact that no matter who she went to, social care, police, nobody cared, that this is not what happens. The men refused to leave her house. Okay, a group of men. And in Chloe's words, quote, it was no longer my quiet little house. It was their house. They smashed windows, kicked in doors, left the house an absolute wreck, and sexually abused Chloe. One of the men pinned her down, pulled his trousers down, and, quote, sat on her face, orally raping her on her own sofa as the rest of the gang watched. Okay. Now, where would these men get this sort of, confidence? These are minorities living in great Britain. You'd think they'd be a little, scared because they know nothing's going to happen to them because the Brits are afraid of being called racist. All right. I don't mean to laugh, but it's pathetic. Come on. It's pathetic. All right. And then this continues. They routinely drugged, abused, and raped her, including with objects such as soft drink cans, keys, and a baseball bat. All right. That is the level of this sort of thing. Now here we go. So Chloe describes being taken into mosques where imams would describe non-Muslims as infidels, kuffar, and preach that white women who dressed inappropriately were free game. Well, yeah, that is exactly what Islam teaches. And so imagine you have a society, the West, that teaches their women to be promiscuous. It's all about love. Don't get married young. You got to go sample around and have a million boyfriends and waste your virtue. You have this society teaching their kids that, and then you have this group which says, "Oh, women who dress inappropriately are free game because Allah says so." What do you think is going to happen when you mix them together? Chloe believes that the local police, social services, NHS, and government were all fully aware of what was happening, including the racialized nature of the crimes, but that they did not intervene for two reasons. Because they, quote, could not be bothered with the paperwork, and, quote, they did not want to be seen as racist. Chloe blames these bodies and their major push for diversity for her abuse. Okay. And this, I'm not going to read all these anecdotes, but what I just read to you, this is almost all of them. Whenever they go to the police, social services, whatever, and I'll read some more, but there's absolutely no response. And oftentimes they become hostile to the girl herself. One thing I didn't see in this report, and I don't know if they have this information readily available. I do think it's important and I think it's interesting and something we should be aware of, which is these authorities that we hear of. I'm sure overwhelmingly they're British, as in to say white, and they're whatever, indifferent, and they're terrified of being called racist. But I wonder how many are Muslims and Pakistani and who are actively actually suppressing this sort of information because they're in positions of power, or maybe they're not in positions of power, but the boss above them is, and he doesn't want to register these particular crimes and pursue them because he doesn't want to make his Muslim Pakistani employee feel uncomfortable. Okay. But anyway, this is the society we live in right now, where it's okay for people to get shot, killed, murdered, as long as we, don't say the word, don't call us racist. That was Henry Nowak, right? Who was killed recently by that Sikh. The whole issue is what? Oh, we pinned you down, even though you're bleeding, even though you're stabbed, because we heard you said something racist. Okay, so mere words out of your mouth, which weren't even true, didn't happen, it was a lie. But even if it did, so what? I mean, have we not heard that sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never kill you? I mean, I learned that as a child, but I guess now we're in a point where, oh no, sticks and stones will kill us, and actual knives stabbed in our guts won't. Okay, so this is the mentality that we are dealing with right now. All right, now, I don't know about you, but are you disgusted yet? Let me take some of your super chats. Duhair Ramadan. Raymond, not on topic, but is 177 kilogram deadlift on the trap bar for 2 repetitions good? Are you serious, man? Hope you don't mind, but it's an important question. God bless. 177 kilograms on the trap bar for 2 repetitions good. That's very, very good, but you might really injure yourself. And I know what I speak of because I do a lot of shrugs, or I used to, because I can, but not that sort of poundages anymore because I tweaked my neck and I have a little nerve damage right now. So impressive, but not necessarily something you might want to do. Anyway, let's get serious here. Julie Mora. Hi, Raymond. Thanks for doing it live on this awful situation. It's happening in Canada now, too sadly. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, it's happening in any liberal Western nation because they are primed for this. That's why they taught you liberalism. So you give up everything and you think life is about, promiscuity and having fun. Then they bring in a culture that just sees that as free game. Quick way to eliminate you. Kyle, Taqiyya versus Mudarat. I've seen Sunnis say they don't have Taqiyya. Shias do, but Mudarat seems to be the Sunni synonym. Is that the case? No, Taqiyya is Taqiyya, and it belongs to every single Muslim, Sunni, and Shia. Shias, however, happen to be the ones who have historically really pioneered it and engaged in it. And that is because the Shias are the minority and they had to live amongst Sunnis who would have killed them. So they learned to internalize everything and pretend to be Sunnis, basically, and not to be Shias. So they're very good at it. However, times have changed. Now you have Sunnis living around who they see and treat as enemies. That is to say, British people, Western people, Canadians, who don't know any better because they're idiots at this point. And so they go there and they engage in Taqiyya, these Muslims, by which it's the same mechanic. Okay, they pretend that they don't believe what they believe. The whole radical thing. Now, this word, I don't know if you're transliterating it correctly, mudarat, but there's so many words and so many. I talked recently about tawreya, and there's kitman. There's so many things. They're all the same. one of the greatest books. I wanted to translate it once upon a time, and it's called Taqiyya fil Islam in Arabic. It is by a professor, an Arab professor, Arab speaking professor, who's I think taught at the American College in Beirut. Really great book. I have it. It's in Arabic, and the long and short of it is he talks about how deception in general is just part and parcel of Islam, of all of the different um, uh, sects, Shia, Sunni, whatever. And he uses all these different words interchangeably almost. So it's not like a rock solid, oh, I'm doing Takeo, but you're doing this. We can talk about it that way, yes. But in general, it's just a culture of deception with all sorts of dispensations. Okay. That's it. Anyway. Lies destroy lives. Raymond, your videos on Tawreya, Takeya, speaking of Sharia, Rabat, Western education, and lies are all important. They put the rape gang scandal into context. Yes, thank you. Lies destroy lives. I agree. The thing is, when you talk about these topics, you quickly find out how interrelated it all is. Nothing is ever separate. Nothing is just separated. This is why when I talk about what Muslims are doing in the West, in Britain, etc., I have to talk about what Western people are doing, what their culture has become, and how it actually creates this Muslim response. Muslims would want to do this anyway, but like I said, you have a culture that has been so disarmed, intentionally so as to enable Muslims to do. They're in your country, in your capital. They have a mayor in your capital who's a Muslim, who's covering up for what they are doing. He's probably doing it. Okay. And you're still sitting around worried about, but they might call me racist. Okay. So, yeah, this is why it's happening ultimately. It's not because these men, it's not because I told you this is like episodes from my book, Sword and Scimitar, where Muslims are just, raiding England and Iceland and all throughout Europe and forcibly abducting girls, and their parents are fighting to the death to save them. That's not the case. Okay. So you have to understand the reality. You're not going to fix this problem by looking at one part of it. Okay. There's two parts and they're connected. But thanks. New member. Hey, thanks. All you members, I just want to tell you something. I've been feeling really bad because I'm not really, I don't know how to do all this YouTube stuff, and I've been learning as I go along. And I know I have members, and I'm very grateful for that. But I'm trying to like give you stuff, perks, which you deserve, and I'm about to start doing it in a decent way. So stay tuned. I'm gonna have videos that are just for you guys, members only, for example. And we might do other things too as I organize myself, which is, not always so easy. Bolo, welcome. All right, let's get back to it. Now, I'm going to continue reading to just again, like I said, quotes. You should read them if you can. All these anecdotes about these girls, what they've experienced, all that's happened to them. But I'm just going to read to you some choice quotes. All right. One Fiona said, quote, I was beaten regularly. I was drugged, filmed being raped, and the footage was distributed. I sustained broken bones, facial injuries, and severe trauma. I was subjected to racial abuse in the community and blamed by families of perpetrators. Pretty common. I think this was probably, if you read this, I'm reading these to you because they, in many ways, capture the entire gist of this report. All right. Here's Michelle. Excuse me. The inquiry panelist asked her, what would you say the main issue was? Michelle says, I don't think that they cared much about us. She's talking about the authorities that they complained to. So she says, I don't think that they cared much about us. They didn't want to open that can of worms because it's a religion thing. I'd probably say 98% of them were Pakistani Muslim. If not, they were Iraqi or Kurdish. All right. And, there are later statistics, which hopefully we'll get to, which do actually give numbers. And I think it was something like 90%, like a solid official number, not an anecdotal one, saying that, the overwhelming majority of them are Muslim and overwhelmingly Pakistani. Whitney, my daughter told me after a while that there was a sex room in the school. I told the school about it, but they completely shut it down and said she was lying. Later on, it was proven she wasn't. Man, like with authorities like these, you don't need enemies. You know, it's just amazing. Are you guys ready for an actual revolution or what? 250th anniversary of another one's coming up. Maybe it's time to emulate. Uh, there's just so many, and some of these I'm reading them. They're men's name, and I guess they're raping men. Sebastian. I'm not even gonna take time with this. You can read it yourself. Okay, here's one. Um, Quote, in the courtroom, the abuse and intimidation continued. They pulled faces, pointed and laughed at her, and made rude remarks about her appearance. So this is a girl who ended up going to court against her rapists. And in the courtroom, the abuse and intimidation continued. They pulled faces, pointed and laughed at her, and made rude remarks about her appearance. This behavior was not addressed by the court. Of course not. It would be Islamophobic and racist. One of the brothers was convicted of sexual assault. Wow. And as he was taken into custody, he shouted, Allahu Akbar. At the same sentencing, the brother's sister shouted abuse at Anna, threatened her, and later breached her anonymity online. She blamed the jury, stating they were all white. She was eventually arrested and charged with malicious communications. All right. So two important points to wax upon here. First of all, the Allahu Akbar. I said this before. I actually have a video circulating somewhere from like 2011 where I break down the Allahu Akbar. What does that mean? All right. Everyone loves to translate Allahu Akbar as God is great, or God is great was the oldest kind of translation I would see. And then some say God is greatest. Wrong. It's not a superlative. It's a comparative in Arabic. It says God is greater than whatever the implied subject is. So when a Muslim, and there's I've read this in the tafsirs, in the exegeses of various Muslim ulama, and they basically say Allahu Akbar. It's called takbir, all right, and it means like the proclamation of the greatness. And what you're saying is Allah is greater than you. Allah is greater than your thing. Okay. So when this man who had just he's raped this woman and abused her and mocked her, and he actually strangely, because this is Britain, was convicted, he realized, you know what, the jig is up. I don't even have to act innocent anymore. So Allahu Akbar to you infidels. Yeah, this is about religion. My Allah is better than you guys. You can't defeat me. I defeat you. That's the logic. As for his sister, the brother's sister shouted abuse at Anna, threatened her, and later breached her anonymity. She blamed the jury. Stating they were all white. Now I find this interesting. You know why? Because these are Pakistanis, and what's going on here is she's projecting. She's projecting how. She's projecting Pakistani culture on white culture. Because in Pakistan, okay, I already alluded to this, the targeting, rape, abduction of Christian women, of Hindu girls who are, both of them are minorities in Pakistan. Pakistan's overwhelmingly Muslim, and Christians and Hindus are something like 1% each, and 98% is Muslim. And both groups are continuously being hounded and abducted. And guess what happens? When the parents go and cry and beg and go to the police just turn a blind eye and do absolutely nothing. Maybe sometimes they tell the perpetrator, go hide for a couple of weeks. And when it finally, if ever, goes to the judge also agrees. And they produce fabricated certificates, making the girl older. The girl will be 12, 13. They'll create certificates that say she's 18, because even Pakistan has an age, a consensual age for marriage. And they'll say, "Oh, there's nothing you can do. She converted to Islam." They'll tell the parents this. She converted to Islam, and that's the end of it. And she's an adult. And the parents will show unequivocal proof that she's young and a minor, and the courts and the judges will ignore it. Okay, that's Pakistani mentality. So this girl, this woman, is angry because her brother got arrested, and she's saying, "Yo, you white people are sticking together," because that's exactly what the Pakistanis do. They prey on their minorities, and from grassroots to all the way to the top, they all work together because loyalty and enmity, al wala wal bara. We'll talk about that one again. That's why I wanted to read that particular excerpt to you, because you see, there's some color to it. All right, we got a couple more super chats. More new members. Roblu. Hello. Thanks for joining. Grand. Pitovic. Welcome. Stay tuned. OMK. Thank you, Raymond, for devoting your life to expose the Islamic cult. What a great cause. Best of luck. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words and the super chat. But I got to tell you, it's getting old. It's like you're beating a dead horse, because I started off talking about Islam because I thought, hey, people don't get it. This is like 20 years ago. Oh, so I'm going to flesh it all out. I'm going to talk about the doctrine. I'm going to talk about the history. I'm going to talk about all these missing things. And I wrote the history books, and I've been doing what I've been doing. And then you start realizing at one point, you know what? It's not about they don't get it. It's because there's something else going on. It's spiritual rot. The culture is completely just has been subverted, and it's ripe for abuse by anyone. This is the problem. I mean, yeah, the Muslims are among the worst in this case, but even if you eliminate them, if the culture doesn't change, you're going to be abused by someone else. You're going to be taken advantage of, mostly by your leaders. But anyway, thanks. Lies destroy lives. In a criminal's mind, whoever has the biggest stick has the most authority. So who has the most authority, the gangs or the government? Well, they're both the same, I think. Just kidding. Or am I? Who are the rapists most afraid of? Who are they going to listen to? These are good observations. This is kind of what I'm alluding to. Imagine, okay, any other country except the West, and especially Britain. If let's say you're an American, you're European, and you go and live in Japan, China, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, even, okay? These are non-Western nations. They have a culture, they have norms, okay? Do you think you can go and start with impunity? You as a minority, let's say it's you and a bunch of Americans, and you guys are like 3%, and go with impunity, just mauling their girls, raping them, taking advantage of them. Well, first of all, you won't be able to, because, like I said, those cultures actually don't allow that sort of thing. All right. Yeah, you can call them what you want, honor, shame, and all that sort of thing. Yeah, but their girls are terrified of actually just going out and promiscuously sleeping around. Yeah, that's good in this case, in this context. But let's say you could, but again, that's it. See, if you could, then it would be the same an analogy, but you can't. All right. And so you have a healthy respect for it. These people, they come to Britain and to the West, they have no respect for you. Okay, because they and this is going to come out in the report actually a lot, how they call the Brits and the girls just animals and pigs and swine, etc., etc. They really see you that way, and you're bringing them in. You're giving. I mean, this is so unprecedented. You bring them in, you give them money, you suppress and shut yourselves down, and then they sit around shoving baseball bats up little girls' anuses, and then the police do nothing. This sounds like hell, man. Maybe it's worse than hell. It's kind of hard to even conceive of. Moving along. So this is Taylor. Here's an excerpt. The only time they helped her, okay, so she's talking about how she was the same story: raped, abused, groomed, moved around, plied with drugs, etc., etc. And then she says, and how the police and everyone, the authorities did nothing whenever she'd reach out and talk to them. And then she says, quote, the only time they helped was when a group of Asian girls called the police. Officers then returned Taylor and her friend home. They actually intervened. Usually they would come and say, oh, you're an adult. I can't do anything. You're with them. Just it's your free will. In this case, because they learned there were Asian girls being harassed with her, they came and forcibly took them home. It goes on. Taylor believes they only intervened on that occasion because they did not want to face accusations of racism, given that the call came from Asian women. So it seems like in Britain, the only time anyone in a leadership or authority position is going to do anything is to avoid being called a racist. Okay, that's your new religion, right? Not being called a word. This again is Taylor. Quote, one common tactic used by the gangs was to send taxis to pick up drunk girls late at night. The driver would pretend to stop at a shop for a drink, then drive off, leaving the girl behind. A group of men would then rescue her, only to take her to a prearranged house for gang rape. Okay. And then it also says a number of women also played a role in directing girls to their abusers. Okay. So this, again, remember, it would be bad enough if this is just, okay, it's a bunch of libidinous, savage Pakistanis and Muslims raping women, but kind of haphazardly. No, this is systematic. This is planned. This is organized. The only way you do that is if you just are so confident that you can get away with it, and that the authorities are just not going to do anything, because that's what happens. Pop the kettle on, love. I hope for change in the UK, but I fear we won't see any. A lot of the country is blind. On a happier note, how is Noob? Hey, Noob. Yeah, he's around. He's happy. He's noobing as usual. He's somewhere around here. Anyway, maybe he'll make a cameo. But thanks for asking. Raymond, don't feel exhausted. Remember Paleo, James. I'm not exhausted. I'm just a little disgusted. It's probably the best word. It's not, I mean, I used to be frustrated, but I'm now like disgusted with these never-ending sordid stories and just the complicity from, the Brits and Western people in general. Anyway, thanks. Lies destroy lives. For many crimes, eye for an eye, wound for wound would reduce crime. It would definitely reduce knife crime. I agree. I believe in that wholeheartedly. And I actually saw a report today about how, based on this report, this sex gang, Pakistani Muslim sex gang report, there's a lot of people now calling for the return of the guillotine, that people need to be punished by being beheaded. I'm all for that. Okay. These kinds of punishments. It's not that they're, it's not humane. Yeah, but you know what? It ends crime. Take a lesson from Vlad the Impaler. I was reflecting the other day on Vlad, and I don't know if you know this, but there's what's called the legend of the goblet. Anyway, Vlad, as if you don't know, he figures prominently in my book, Defenders of the West, Chapter 8. And, Dracula is what we're talking about, the real Dracula. And, he was an impaler, and he was known to be immensely draconian with punishments. Okay. But he was also known, according to the old Russian Chronicle, which is one of the earliest source, actually, that talks about him, as being just. And so it gives the legend of the goblet, as it calls, though I don't know if it's a legend, sounds kind of true, where Vlad, because he was hospitable, had a golden goblet and he put it by some well, so passersby could actually drink. And in this day and age, I mean, today people would rob it, but in that day and age, people would really have robbed it because they were peasants and starving. Nobody touched it. It just sat there. Why? Because people knew there would be a price to pay if you broke the law and stole this. What would it be? Yeah, you'd be impaled. Okay, so yeah, there's a reason historically there have been very draconian punishments, including in the West, including in the United States, capital punishment. Okay, it's to deter, right? You don't want to get killed, You don't want to be impaled? Don't do stupid things. Don't break the law. How about that? How about getting people to do that? Don't break the law. Don't be a bad person. Don't rape and stick baseball bats up kids' anuses, and we won't kill you. I mean, that sounds like a fair deal to me, right? But the idea of like, oh, no matter what a person does, you can't harm them. Yeah, that's what gets you precisely where you are right now. Lies destroy lives. If anything be against justice, it cannot be called mercy, for it is cruelty. Good old George MacDonald. Yeah, you always remind me of good old George, and I hope anyone watching this uh, follows up and does look up George MacDonald, who I believe was a Scottish pastor who once was Calvinist, because, you know, that's what the Scots are, but then saw through it. Anyway. Cray Zivan. Hey, Raymond, as always, I am thankful for your top tier educational content, brother. Thank you. I continue to discuss these things with my Coptic friend at work. I live in the DFW area, which is a hotbed now. Oh, Dallas Fort Worth. Yes. Yeah. This Texas thing and the mosques and the Muslims. There we go again. You know, there you go again. Are the Muslims invading Texas and saying, "Oh, you infidels, we are going to build mosques. What are you going to do about it?" And the Texans are fighting back with their cowboy hats? No, they're letting it happen. That's the problem, right? That is the problem. You can't ever blame a people because they're advancing their cause. Their cause may be right, wrong. That's not the point. But if they want to advance it, I get it. You want to conquer me and enslave me. All right, I get it. But when I actually acquiesce and enable that sort of behavior, I think that becomes the bigger issue. Oh, man. All right. Flippy, you look like Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. I know who he is because I watched wrestling back in the 80s and 90s. Do I really? Wasn't he like blonde? But I'll take that as a compliment because if I do recall, he was quite yoked. All right, let's move on now. Grand Pito, Vic. Raymond, just know that so many of us that you needed to reach are hearing you. We are learning as fast as we can. God bless you, brother. Well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad to know that. And by the way, if you're subscribed or if you really want to follow me, keep an eye on things because I've been getting lots and lots of emails of people telling me we're subscribed and then we don't see your stuff and we realize we've been unsubscribed or we have the notification on and it gets turned off or stuff like that. So it seems like, the usual is back. All right. I don't know if you know, but this channel I actually created in 2012 and about a few months into it, I stopped doing anything on it because of the constant harassment and censorship. And then I said, I'll give it a go about a year ago, and things have been okay until recently. So just a word of warning. Yeah, maybe I'm being paranoid. I don't know, but all I'm telling you is what a lot of people are telling me. Yeah. All right. Let's continue on. And then I think, what time is it? It's, we're almost done with the main sections. And then I'm going to bring Ralph Scholhammer on. All right. So again, I'm just reading to you these various anecdotes. The bulk of the report really is these testimonials. Okay. And I'm just reading to you excerpts. So here's another one. Taylor, quote, before they raped me, they would chant Bismillah ar-Rahman nir-Rahim. All right, that's an incorrect transliteration. It should be Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim, which means in the name of Allah, the merciful, the magnificent. Okay. Now, isn't that an interesting invocation to cast forth when you're about to rape someone? I mean, think about that for a second. What are we talking about here? So there is a religious element, is there not? Why would you say that? You know when Muslims say this, Bismillah, like when they're about to do something sacred. And so what is exactly sacred about raping some girl? Well, as we will eventually see, maybe not today, because as you can see, time's pressing and we're not even halfway through and there's so much to cover. But as I will get to in maybe the next live stream, yeah, there's an actual, this is as sick as it is, it's almost like a sacrament to some Muslims. It's based on an interpretation. I'm not saying to all Muslims, okay, but yeah, there's interpretations and there's texts, there's scriptures that facilitate this interpretation. So there's one excerpt for you. Get my soda pop here. Bear with me. We're almost through this harrowing section. All right, Lily. Okay, here's some quotes. After moving onto the council estate, trouble began immediately. One older boy attempted to take Lily's hand from her mother when she was 5 years old. Her mother reported it to the police, but it was treated as a joke. Years later, the same person went on to rape a 3-year-old. So here, some migrant tried to grab this girl when she was, what did it say? When she was 5. Her mom reported it, and the police treated it as a joke, which is their way of saying, I don't want to be involved because I can't be called racist. And then this guy went on to rape a 3-year-old, 2 years younger than Lily. Over time, Lily and her siblings were taken into care. Siblings who returned home disclosed severe abuse in children's homes, including rape, violence, humiliation, and intimidation. Lily herself was groomed and repeatedly abducted and raped by a man from the age of 6. He threatened to harm her sisters if she spoke. Lily's sister was sexually abused by her own social worker at age 12. Yeah, this is talking about the social workers actually raping them. Migrants. Muslims, probably Pakistanis. This was actively covered up by management. Is it because the management was Pakistani? Who pretended he was in a relationship with another social worker to deflect suspicion. Yeah. He gained legal guardianship of Lily's sister and eventually married her. He was paid by the local authority, and her sister never completed her education. Lily witnessed children being selected by staff and handed over to foreign taxi drivers over many years. Okay. So even in the homes where these girls who've been raped are seeking refuge or are sent for refuge, the workers, I assume if they're Muslim, they go and give them to the notorious taxi drivers. Phase 1 of the rape gang. Okay. It's just, it's surreal. As an adult, Lily learned that police and council records of her abuse had been hidden for decades. Operation Marmion briefly acknowledged her account before being shut down at a senior level. She was told the perpetrators were out of jurisdiction, dead, or untraceable. No one has ever been held accountable. Okay. And look at this quote from Lily. They would toot the horn of the car, and then a child would be taken to the front door by a staff member of the children's home. Okay. So raped, abused, groomed children would be taken to safe houses, apparently run by or infiltrated by these rape gang people. And then one of the taxi drivers, I told you the taxi drivers is kind of like the phase 1. They become their friends. They give them free rides. They give them drinks. And then they start taking them places like homes that have 10 Pakistani men waiting to rape them. A taxi driver would come and honk the horn, and these social workers at these homes would take these little girls and give it to them. Are there any men left with balls in Britain? I gotta ask. I'm sorry. I know this is too much, but it's just. Are there any men? I know there's males. Males and females. That's an anatomical, biological distinction. Okay, I know, like dogs, they're males and females. But are there men on a metaphysical level anymore? Time will tell. And again, I'm not picking on anyone per se, because I know everyone's been compromised by decades and generations of subversion and emasculating you and whatnot, because it's been a concerted effort, and you've let your guard down. Or not you, your parents and their grandparents let their guard down, and therefore you are where you are. But it's time to defend the West, isn't it? It's time to gird your loins, I think. All right. All right. Let's take one more here. Jesus is king. If only he was of Britain, none of this would happen. Hi, sir. Thank you for your ministry and dedication to expose the lies of Islam. It is true. There is no direct conversation between Gabriel, and Mo. Oh, is it true that there is no direct conversation between Jibril and Mo in the Quran, only in the Hadith? Who actually wrote the Quran? Is Jibril Allah? All right. Look, these are a lot of important questions. Yeah, almost everything we know that's pieced together about Muhammad's life is the hadith, and especially the seerah, the biography. So the Quran is very poetic, and okay, great. I see Ralph has joined. The Quran is very poetic and very abstract, and sometimes you have no idea what it's talking about. But I don't know for certain if the Quran does or doesn't say. All right, I probably did at one point, but it got crowded out of my head. All right, but these are good questions. And who actually wrote the Quran? Well, humans obviously wrote it. We know that, but when was it written? There's the whole thesis that it was made up by some Umayyad Caliph, etc., etc. All right, so that's another topic for another day. It's a good question. But the bottom line is, do you believe here's what it comes down to, right? The Quran and the Islamic origin story. I'm not a Muslim. You know what that means? I believe Muhammad is a false prophet. Now, whether Muhammad existed or didn't exist, it's the same thing. Okay, Muslims are being lied to. They're either being lied to by believing Muhammad was a prophet and he wasn't, or they're being lied to by being told there was a guy who never existed who said he was a prophet and he didn't. So, all right, very convoluted stuff. But let's now, I'm going to bring on Ralph Scholhammer, and you may have actually seen me with him just yesterday. I think I mentioned this. Coincidentally, we actually did a video talking about these very topics, I think a couple of weeks ago, and it came out yesterday, coincidentally, and now he's gracious enough to come on right now, and I'm going to ask him, because he knows a lot. He's European, he's from Vienna, he's covered these topics very closely, so let me bring him on and see what he has to say. Hi, Ralph. How's it going?
Hi, Ibrahim. Good to talk to you. It's you who is gracious to have me on your show. I really appreciate it.
No, it's my honor. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. So what's the deal? What do you think of this report? What's going on? What are your thoughts? I mean, obviously, there's so much to flesh out and talk about this report. I'm trying to remove this. Oh, here we go. Okay. So yeah, let's have at it. Share your mind with us.
You're Raymond. You are a Coptic Christian, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
So let's do a quick thought experiment. Let's just let's try to kind of steelman the Rupert Lowe, the rape gang inquiry report. So there's a lot of debates whether the 250,000 is too high, whether it's too low. But let's take one number we know, right? We know that there have been 1,400 victims in Rotherham. Now imagine for a second in Pakistan or in Egypt, there would be an investigation that shows that Coptic Christians have gang raped and tortured 1,400 Muslim girls. We all know what would happen to the churches and the Christian community in this.
Oh my God!
We all know what would happen. I mean, I just really want to point this out, because we always hear, the West is so racist and so Islamophobic and so terrible. But the immediate reaction you had in the West, at least in some parts.
Wait. Since you made this analogy, I'm now going to have to tell people what would happen. Okay.
Well, go on.
Because I actually know, because I know exactly what would happen. So already, okay. So what you're basically saying is it's a good analogy. The Coptic Christians are a minority in Egypt. They're the indigenous people. Okay, they were there before the Muslims conquered them. They're about, let's say, 10%. I think Muslims are something like 10% in Britain. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is, let's imagine if the cops all of a sudden came out, they were grooming and raping Muslim girls, etc., etc. All right. Here's all I have to tell you: that if it's even, because according to Islamic law, a Muslim man can go out with Christians, Jews, because they're infidels and because they're women, and women are already second class. So it doesn't matter if they're infidels; they have no authority. But a Christian cannot, or a non-Muslim cannot go out with cannot marry a Muslim girl. Now, frequently in Egypt, you will hear a rumor that a Coptic or Christian man was dating a Muslim girl, just dating, and that they both like each other, Muslims will rise up and burn down every single Christian home and church based on that. So now that's what would happen if there's like a consensual dating, not rape, between one of those Christians and one of those Muslims. And you're basically saying, well, what would happen if actually they found out for 50 years or way more actually, the cops were systematically raping and torturing Muslim girls? There would be a genocide in one day, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of this story, because we have to ask the question. I mean, I don't want to formulate it too provocatively, but whether and we talked about this in our previous conversation as well, or at least we alluded to it, whether our self-perceived degree of civilization, if you want, is not also a form of weakness. Now, it's almost midnight here in Austria, so forgive me, and your audience, forgive me if I don't formulate my thoughts as clearly as I want to. But you know what I mean. I think that it's some people in the comments, where have all the real men gone? And I'm not sure it's like necessarily a man issue, but it's very odd that we haven't even talked that much in the public debate. Wasn't even that much about the perpetrators. It immediately was about, well, maybe it hasn't been 250,000, maybe it was only 25,000. And I think this is where our thought experiment comes in quite illuminating, to say in any other country, if it would be 1,000, all hell would break loose. And in the UK, the debate is, well, it might be, because the thing is also, by the way, that it might be less than 250,000, but it might also be more than 250,000, because the British government refused to keep accurate records about this. So maybe one wants to err on the side of a lower number, but it is just as possible that the number is slightly higher. So this truly is, and this has been going on. I know you have talked about this on your show already, but just to really emphasize this again, this has been going on for 13 years. And more or less nobody talked about it. I mean, it really beggars belief what has happened there.
This is an old tactic too, which I see. And basically, what you're saying is they it's like a smoke screen. They start nitpicking at the number as if that's what the issue is. Oh, it's not 250. It's only whatever. It's only 150. It doesn't matter, man. It's And this is the Muslim example I gave you with the Egyptian and the cops. I mean, there were other instances in Egypt where, get this, Coptic women, okay, were supposedly, because this happens often, Muslims will abduct Coptic women and forcibly convert them, just like in Pakistan, identical. And they may, you see, it's like 1 week earlier, the Coptic woman was with her husband and children. There's pictures of her happy, and then a week later, she makes a video wearing a hijab. And she's like, yes, I've converted to Islam of my own free will. And I'm and everyone knows she was kidnapped and abducted. Okay. So this happened. And finally, at one point, the Coptic church managed to get one of these women back. Okay. And the Muslims rioted, burned like 15 churches. Okay. Because the Christians reclaimed one of their own. And the Muslims presented it as, look, she's a true Muslim and they're taking her against her will. How can we stand for this? So that was one woman, all right? Her name was Camilla. So whether it's 250,000 girls or probably 500,000 or 100,000, yeah, it's completely irrelevant. But that's the game they like to play, get you. It reminds me of what happened to Henry Nowak, which is kind of like the argument became, the bad thing isn't that the police were more concerned that he might have said a word, not that he was stabbed. The bad thing was that the guy lied. He didn't say the word. It doesn't matter. Actually, they're both bad, because even if he had said the word, a word is not as bad as stabbing someone, right?
I mean, I don't know how many of your viewers and listeners have followed. There was a story that came out of Scotland it was almost a couple of months ago, and lots of memes and pictures were going around. It was a little girl defending her sister from being approached by
I remember that. Yeah, but tell us about it.
Yeah, right. Where she was brandishing, I think, a knife and a small axe. I mean, I don't know why she had anyways, and. So the story then very quickly moved in the direction, well, this was all made up, right? That actually that the girls were the threat, and unheard, and a couple of media outlets that I usually have a very high opinion of, right? Immediately they went on Twitter, The Spectator, right? Everybody went out and said, "Okay, this is the the meme, that was the meme fantasy of the right, right? Kind of this idea that there something has been imagined that didn't really happen. Now we have the actual court decision, and it happened precisely the way as the girls told the story from the beginning, right? They were approached in an inappropriate sexual manner by, in this case, again, two people from Bulgaria. So, it doesn't always have to be from the Middle East. It doesn't always have to be Islam. But again, the immediate reaction was that the native Scottish girls, they must be lying, or they must make something up, or the online rights that jump to their defense, they must be, making stuff up, and all the the highbrow posh journalists. They knew it better, and now there was some begrudging admittance that, well, it turned out that actually the original reporting was right. And don't get me wrong, the mistakes happen on both sides, but this reflex, this knee-jerk reaction to immediately take the side of the foreigner or the perpetrator, and not the native population and the victim. It is very, very odd. I mean, we had these cases, we talked a lot on your podcast about Germany, but we really had debates, for example, after the famous, I'm sure that many of your viewers have heard it, the New Year's night in Cologne, I think it was in 2017, 2018.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. And again, once the dust has settled, the pretty much all the worst expectations were proven to be correct. You had the police reports and all of you had the complaints, you had the women who filed reports, but then you still had newspaper articles that said, well, maybe women who don't like foreigners were making those stories up. So it is very odd. And as I always say, that the point is not to generalize, the point is not to demonize, but it is equally important to say that there are certain problems that you have been writing about for a very long time, that some on the political right have been warning for almost 30 years. I mean, I give you a concrete example. What am I saying? 30 years. Enoch Powell basically issued his first warning in 1968. That's almost 60 years ago. Now, he probably got the details wrong, but I think the broad outline was correct. Then a work of fiction, but I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with, is Jean Raspail's, writes the Camp of the Saints. It's fiction, but I think it was written in 75, 76, thereabouts. But in many ways, it predicted particularly the behavior of the elites. This is, for those of you who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a harrowing
and it was
read.
banned. It was so banned you could never find this book until banned. I heard recently. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the point is, both in the realm of, and then of course you had submission by my French is very bad, by Monsieur Houellebecq, or however you pronounce him. We probably have to write it in the description of the video. So there is an entire genre of politicians, of political parties, of non-fiction, of fiction. We talked about Mark Stein, you had Badior, of course yourself. I think there's no need to diminish your contribution to this debate. So this whole, oh my God, who could have seen it coming? Everybody who had eyes to see saw it coming. And we did even see it, just as a reminder, you even saw it a little bit during the Arab Spring, if you remember Lara Logan, right? There is, again, I think it's maybe because it's a young average age, it's more testosterone. I'm sure there is an explanation for it, but the explanation does not change the fact that when it comes to sexual violence, and particularly sexual violence towards women that are perceived as being part of an out-group, whether they are Christians, whether they're Coptic, you had similar things in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem. This is something that is happening, and it's very annoying that we cannot even have an open debate about this, because you immediately, this is what some commenters accused me of in our previous conversation, and it's true. I really do it. I have to apologize for it. That one immediately says, well, I don't want to sound racist, I don't want to sound judgmental, but that you immediately have to precede every argument you make with, but I really don't mean it. It's true. I'm a victim of the things I criticize myself. That is very true.
So, okay. What I want to know is, obviously the word racist is so weaponized. And I mean, on the one hand, I understand it's weaponized. On the other hand, I don't understand why people care. I mean, that's the part I don't get. Okay. It's kind of like, it's been weaponized, but why do you let it be a weapon against you? Why can't you see through it and be like, you know what? Call me racist all you want. I don't care. All right. But okay. So it's been weaponized. What I'm trying to understand now, all these authorities who, don't believe these women, right, that we're talking about, is it literally because they are afraid of the word racist? Or could it be that, I mean, because I read different things, and is it because maybe they just, I heard a lot of it is a class thing. They look down on a lot of these working class women, and it's just kind of like, yeah, you know, you're garbage anyway. Who cares? That sort of thing. Because it's important to understand all the facets involved. I mean, I know for a fact the racist card is one of the top, if not the top one. But what other elements are involved in this sort of, you know, denial and lack of cooperation from the authorities?
Well, it's a good question, and I think that the element you mentioned, a certain element of snobbery, I think is
Mm,
absolutely true. And I would argue that the genuine fear of being called a racist apparently really has, particularly apparently in the police force and in the public administration, has more power than one would think. But let me tell you a story.
okay.
This is, I think it's in the book Lights Out by Mark Stein, and this story stuck with me. So it goes like this. Mark Stein describes it. Everybody can look it up. There is it's in an office, and for whatever reason, that the police comes in, and the white guy says to his black coworker, "Ah, now they're coming for you." No, not the greatest joke in the world, but it was meant as a joke. The black coworker laughed it off. Right? No, no big deal. It was not the greatest joke, but nothing bad. A third person heard it and then reported the guy to HR. And you can read the full story in Mark Stein's book, but to cut the long story short, it ended with the guy pretty much, blowing his own head off. So this is the thing. So it's not just an emotional pressure that comes from being called a racist. You can actually be exposed to genuine, life-threatening or income-threatening, career-threatening consequences by some guy who wasn't even involved. That's the fascinating thing. Who wasn't even involved in the conversation. Now let me add on a bigger number to this. In Germany alone, last year, the government spent 25 million euros. I mean, I know these days when we only talk about billions and trillions, that doesn't seem that much, but in the realm of NGOs, 25 millions is not a small sum. And that's only for so-called anti-Muslim racism. So immediately when you and I have these conversations, if we would have that conversation in Germany, right, there would be a significant chance that some government-financed NGO would say, Raymond and Ralph, what they say is anti-Muslim racism. And maybe hypothetically, we work for a German company. They would not come to us and say, man, what you guys say is a problem. They would go to our employer, and our employer would say, oh, I could, defend Raymond and Ralph, but is it worth the hassle? So all of a sudden you find yourself in HR hell and in sensitivity training and whatnot. So there is a pressure system also in place.
The
And I
chilling
would imagine
effect.
a chilling effect, precisely. And I would imagine that's also the case, at least with some members of the British police. I refuse, and maybe I'm naive, but I refuse that everybody willingly turned a blind eye or was participating. But I can
That would be
imagine
hard. That would
scenarios.
be so hard to. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's hard to believe. It's hard. It is so hard to believe, but I don't know anymore at this point. You know, to me, the idea that a word can so paralyze people. You know, this idea, I call you a racist, and now you fall down on your face, and you give up your girls to get raped. Like, how did this happen? How did how did we get to this pass? I know that's a big question, but it's just again, I always ask you this. I ask
I
these
do.
questions of everyone.
I mean, no, I think it's a great question, and I would say there is a tendency, and this is worries me, that we sooner or later will also have these grooming gangs with perpetrators of a non-migrant background. Because I'm a sincere believer
Yes,
that if you
yeah,
don't punish, devious behavior or deviancy, you will get more of it. So I'm
right,
sure this whole grooming thing started probably very small, but
yeah.
the authorities didn't do anything. They turned a blind eye. So more and more men got involved, and then this whole thing started to grow, and nobody did anything about it. So more and more people started to participate. And as I said, I think for you and I, there still is call it a civilizational barrier. It's like, so I don't know anybody. I could not pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, listen, I have a 15-year-old girl in my basement. You want to come over? I wouldn't know whom to call. And if I would call somebody, they would report me to the police. But once you have this kind of milieu where this is possible, this grows very quickly. And I was speaking to some of the people who were really involved in the investigations. And one of the things that surprised them the most was that very often, for example, the wives of the perpetrators knew about this, but they tolerated it. And this tells me something that you have talked about quite eloquently, right? That there is a cultural factor. Because I think, I guess men can be we had the Pellico case in France. We had I'm sure people heard about the Fritzl case in Austria, right? The guy who locked his daughter up for 12 years in the basement and had 4 children with her. So it is absolutely. So when people say this is not just happening within one culture, that is absolutely true. But it was done clandestinely. It was, but the Pellico case is slightly different. But at least the Fritzl case was he hid it in his basement. This was not something where he called up his neighbors and said, "Hey, you want to come over? I have this girl in this case, his own daughter, locked up in the basement." But in the grooming gang case, it's really the involvement of the large number of people. But if you don't stomp out this kind of misbehavior, if it happens on a small scale, you will automatically get a larger scale. And this is, it's the weird idea that we have taken over, or that the idea has taken over the West, that we truly are all good people, and the few that deviate from being good, don't punish them too hard. You just have to explain to them. You just have to carefully and softly bring them back into civilized society. Generally, I believe that I think everybody has the potential to be good, but also everybody has the potential to give in to the most horrific temptations if they present themselves. And and by the way, you also have group pressure, particularly among young men. So it's, I guess, if this sounds horrible, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. But if you are then in a group of young men, or in many cases middle-aged or even older men, and everybody participates, if you don't participate, right, you probably come under pressure yourself, because they say, well, why are you not going along with this? What's your problem? Are you not a real man?
That's in the report. That's actually in the report,
Yeah.
where it talks about along with being groomed and raped by older men, a lot of these women talk about how they brought younger men, 18, and they were like pressuring them to also participate in the fun. So it's all there. And the point, though, is this whole racism and being paralyzed and all that sort of thing. One of the thoughts that I've always had, which is because everything that's happening is so beyond ironic in many ways, because it's always the exact opposite. Okay, so like the white man is presented as the epitome of evil. He's racist. He's this horrible person, even though he's opened his doors to everyone and given his children up to get raped. But I think the irony is, and you alluded to it, which is that a lot of the people of Western European culture, the reason you can shame them and call them racist and they actually respond to it is because they are conscientious people. Okay,
Agreed.
you could never use this with anyone else. If you went up to Africans and Middle Easterners and Arabs and Asians and said you're racist, they would just be like, yeah, and okay. But because the people of the West have such a developed sense of ethics and conscientiousness, and because there is that leftover residue of Christianity. Okay, when they hear that, they bristle. I don't want to be a bad person judging someone by their color, so they freak out. So it's interesting because because they are good, that's being used against them to make them feel guilty. And they've bought into the lie that, yeah, my history, my culture, my heritage is the most evil one, and therefore it's my job now. It's payback. Haven't you heard that? It's payback time. Now it's my turn to do. Yeah, we have to be raped. We have to be colonized. We have to suffer. We have to take it. And so I find that highly ironic, amazing, and more than anything diabolical. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely correct. And since I'm a Christian myself, I think I'm maybe not entitled, but I think I can say this without being a hypocrite. There is an issue, and if you want a philosophical one within Christianity, which is this emphasis, which can be very beautiful, but it also can be very dangerous, right? The idea that kind of how to put this, it depends on which people you applied. But for example, and as we discussed, so there's the idea that there is even that the same happens when we talk about wokeness, right? That there is a certain hierarchy of victimhood, and that those who are perceived to be on a lower rung of that ladder, they're automatically morally superior. So if your perception of the world is, whether it's in the post-Christian West or whichever country you want to take, that, for example, the Pakistani migrant is on a lower rung, then you also kind of grant this person to some extent supposedly moral superiority. Now, if that person then does something terrible, you have a really hard time condemning it, right? Because it's this whole the last will be first and the downtrodden
No.
will inherit the earth, all of this. Now, I think it's a wrong interpretation of Christianity. I'm not defending it, but I think you see this a lot, and it goes back to what you said, right? So because the white guy, if you want, the white male, the white heterosexual male is like on the top of the ladder. So only that person, only that individual, or that group, they are the only ones who can be genuine perpetrators. Which is
Yeah.
why you had to give another example. I mean, it's so ironic. I'm sure that many of your viewers, particularly those in the United States, will remember there were all these headlines about fraternities who supposedly, gang raped all these girls in I think in Virginia and whatnot. Where it turned out, or this was something that Ann Coulter did a lot of work on, the Duke lacrosse players, right? A lot of this turned out to be a complete hoax, like not genuinely a hoax. Like a lot of these things never happened, but it was immediately believed because it fits the narrative, right? Or the belief system that these were rich white boys from elite universities, they must be rapists. It was like the perfect Law and Order SVU episode. Kind of it fit the pattern perfectly. And if you have a case like in the UK, it's not just that we debate the numbers. There's always this element of disbelief. Is it made up? Did it really happen? Are there maybe some socioeconomic factors at
How can a
play?
white person be a victim? That's so like
Yes,
it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
you're 100% correct. And this, I recently participated in a debate with Mehdi Hassan on Al Jazeera, and it was a very odd thing. But the idea that something like Islamization, if you want, Islamization in the sense, right, that these things happen and that they have a theological component to it. It's you're treated like if you're a mad person, like you're seeing things, you're hallucinating things. And by the way, it works because again, this is my fault that I have to apologize to viewers, because I always then catch myself that all of a sudden I'm thinking, am I hallucinating it? Right? Is it possible that I'm wrong? And this always bothers me again about this like cognitive behavioral therapy I'm doing right here with you. But then I really have to tell myself, no, this is reality. This is why I was so saddened by the content, but grateful that Rupert Lowe, that they made this report, and whatever flaws might be in it, that now it's written down. And by the way, I would say, I know contentious topic, I'd be very careful here, so because the details are still sketchy. But you saw it a little bit also with the Epstein files, right? Where immediately and maybe again, I'm not saying, to be very clear, I'm not saying it's not true, but kind of what immediately the claim of mass pedophilia, sexual violence was taken for granted. Whereas in the British case, it took 13 years to publish a report on it. And I would argue there is a kind of racism at work, but it goes the other direction than the media wants to make you believe.
Okay, so this report, which and I don't know. I know it's. I think it's. I read the forward. I think it's by Rupert Lowe. So I don't know if it's being somehow sponsored by Restore Britain, or what the connection is. But be that as it may, I think it's a great thing, and I'm glad it's being done. What impact, if any, do you think this will even have?
I mean, I think it already had massive impact.
Okay.
The two new political movements in the UK, both Restore and Reform. I mean, there was a by-election just 24 hours ago where both of them did not do very well. But I think starting new political movements in a political system like the UK is very difficult. It's like starting a new political, slightly different, but you can compare it to trying to start a new political party in the United States. So the kind of success that they are having is already quite impressive. And the grooming gang issue has been front and center for kind of the rise of Reform and potentially of Restore now for at least the last two or 3 years. And one has to admit also that the one person who picked this up and really put it front and center was, love him or hate him, was Elon Musk. Kind of it was him who really, so the switch from Elon Musk to kind of pick up on these issues on on a global scale, because one could say, why does Elon Musk care what's happening in the UK? Why does he care what's happening in Belfast? That really made a difference, because his voice, again, whatever you think of him, but his voice is one that is very difficult to ignore. And it's kind of, they tried it after the event where he supposedly did the Hitler salute and all of this. So they really tried to paint him in that corner, but it's very difficult. It's because he doesn't fit that corner. And by the way, just as an amusing side note, that corner gets pretty crowded. I mean, isn't the guy who's running for senator of Maine for the Democrats with the death hat, the Waffen-SS tattoo on his chest? So,
Yeah. So let me ask you this. This is a true distinction. Okay. If you go back 10, the further we go back, the worse it was, and because we didn't have the nature of the internet, which is great because people can, communicate, social media and whatnot. By which I mean the mainstream media, the elites had power of the knowledge of the information that came to us. So now this information would have never come to us 20 years ago because they would have made sure it wouldn't. Now we have this kind of information. Do you think that will? So do you think this is a matter of information being suppressed, and now that the information is becoming publicly available to the Britons in particular, Western people in general? Do you think it's a matter of information? In other words, if enough people, Western people, know what's really happening because they didn't, that is going to be a major catalyst for change? Or, and this is where it becomes a little more philosophical and we go back to this sort of paralytic racism, we're scared, or is it still that's the main issue? Even if people know the facts, even if the whole world, if every last Western European knew this, they're still scared of being called racist. So to what impact do you think gaining this knowledge will actually have results on the ground?
I think it's going to have an impact, and you can see it particularly in continental Europe, in the way in which also the political, I wouldn't just say the establishment, the political institutions are reacting, right? All these debates that we are still having about banning X or replacing X. I think there is, by the way, just as we are speaking right now, I don't think anybody is using it, but there is this new, I forgot even the name. It's not a very catchy name. There is not Blue Sky, but there's yet another social media platform that was created and approved by the European Union. So there is the deliberate attempt kind of to create these, I wouldn't even call it echo chambers, to create these information environments where you are shielded from the issues that you and I are debating. But the problem is it's not catching on. People are not moving into those environments because the idea, yes, X has changed. I think there's some issues with the algorithm. There's a lot of clickbaiting and click chasing out there. So there's a lot of room for improvement. But if you follow the right accounts, for example, I said, if you follow your account and a couple of other people, you still can get very valid, very valuable information. So it's a little bit also depending on the user, what you want. But certain stories I think we would not have heard about. I mean, just today, but this one person who apparently threw a 3-year-old child into the
crocodile.
The crocodile. I'm not sure if you would have, at least not in
what
that short
is
amount
this?
of time.
What is it?
Right?
I mean, the word surreal doesn't do it justice anymore.
Yeah. And
like,
and the same is true when we look at things like beheadings in public streets. So it's not just what was attempted in Belfast, but you had, as I think, Samuel Paty in France, right, who was beheaded in public. You had Lee Rigby, the drummer in the UK, and one could say, well, but that's only a handful of cases. Yeah, but again, you don't want to live in the world where you have the genuine risk of walking out the front door and somebody's getting beheaded in the street. This is just. It wasn't like this. The point is not to be nostalgic towards a past that never existed. It's like some very basic things like, please don't behead people in the streets. I mean, generally, I would say the people and the public are very modest in their demands.
Yeah.
They want to, yeah. They want to continue to use the parks. They want to continue to, wherever it's possible, to leave the door unlocked. Like it's they want their daughters to feel safe. Like these are all very minor demands by the population. This is not some crazy stuff. It's kind of things that have been common, just a couple of years ago. Now I immediately hasten to add, right, This does not mean that there was no crime in the past. That doesn't mean that there was no rape in the past. All of these things happened. But what did
It
not
was just
happen is
1%. It was 1% of what it is.
precisely, precisely. And the numbers, every European country that is creating reliable statistics on this show that people from certain areas are overrepresented when it comes to certain crimes, and
No, no.
sometimes they are overrepresented by a factor of 5, 6, or 7. Even if you, by
This
the way,
report,
control for age and so yeah, the
this
report has it in
report
it, but it's not just in the
basically
UK.
This report, I'll probably get to it in another part, but I remember the number. I'm very close. It said something like 90%. It's Muslims, but Muslims, according to their statistics, are 6% of the population. So imagine you have a 6% population committing 90% of the rapes. Okay, but now you said something which I I want to add to. You were talking about how what the European population wants is very modest. Okay, which I agree with. And excuse me, you get to a point where you realize something. All that, all that the European politicians had to do is nothing to make
Yeah.
Europe a utopia. Okay, which is why I insist that this is not this is active. Okay, in other words, when Tony Blair, 1997, mass migration. Okay, so he did something. He actively did something. If he was a politician like who just I'm not going to do anything, nothing would have changed. Okay, you wouldn't have this. But they actively did something that brought in this hostile mentality, Islam, Pakistanis, etc., who prey on precisely the kind of people that you've degraded your own people into becoming. Okay, and lo and behold, this is happening. So when you say, that the people, what they want is modest, well, absolutely. All what they really want is for the politicians to do nothing. Okay, don't. Well, now they have to do something. But if it was, let's say, 1950s Britain, 60s, whatever, before the mass migration, I mean, there, I know Muslims and Pakistanis were there as far as early as 1955. But whatever the case may be, if they did nothing, then everything would have actually. These countries, no countries are utopia. Okay, but they would be so far much better. They wouldn't have these crimes. The women can go out in public and not worry about being mauled and raped and groomed, etc. People could go out at night without being afraid. People, Muslims and migrants wouldn't be abusing the system financially, etc., etc. So they actively created this, and this is one thing that I always want people to understand. Okay,
So
that this didn't. Go ahead.
yeah, they actively created it, and I would say they did so against the resistance of the population. The bigger
Yeah.
problem was that the population lacked the imagination that they would be really doing this. I just want to return for 1 second to Enoch Powell in 1968, when he gave his Rivers of Blood speech. The reaction by the establishment was outrage, and it was I think it was the London Times or one of the major British newspapers at the time.
Tell us about this River of Blood speech.
So basically, first of all, Enoch Powell was a politician, right, in the 1960s. A very smart man. Spoke several languages fluently. So not the kind of right wing populist of the kind of brand that we have today. A classic, we could say, snobbish upper class British guy. But he was getting letters from his constituents, right, and we talk about the 1960s here, where you already had things like public security, the sense of safety disappearing, where people were worried and complaining about, again, we're talking about the 1960s, about the consequences of these early steps of mass migration. So he gave this speech, and they also did a very interesting TV interview at the time, where he said that if we continue on this course, what's then going to happen is it will lead to civil unrest. It will lead to clashes. Or he didn't call it, supposedly these rivers of blood. And he gave this interview where he did a debate with another politician, and the other politician said, "Well, what's the big deal? What's the problem if few people come in?" And he very correctly said, because the quantity matters. There's a difference if it's 10 people that come in or if it is 1 million people that come in. And the interesting thing about his career was that was according to, I forgot which British newspaper it was. They said they got, I think, 30,000 letters, and not a single one was against Powell's position all of them were supportive of his position. He was a right-wing politician, and you had then left-wing demonstrators who said, "Don't knock Enoch." So it was kind of basically were going on the streets
Mm.
for him. So the sense of the people that something
This
is
is
happening.
1960s.
1968, right? We talk about, so this was 60 years ago. So the idea that is sometimes being perpetrated, that public resistance to migration is a new phenomenon, that it's what's the term, rebel rousers, that the right
Ah,
wing, that it's
ah,
alarmists that cause it.
ah.
So everything would be fine and dandy if there wouldn't be social media. I mean, I'm not saying that social media doesn't play a role, but the general sense that something's off starts in the 1960s. And if you go through the speeches of General de Gaulle, if you hear Helmut Kohl talking in the 80s, as you correctly said, everybody knew, everybody started to see, man, this is just not going to work out. Yet for some reason that I guess we would have to make an entire show on this. In the 90s, because it's not just 2015 with Angela Merkel, it starts in the 90s, as you correctly mentioned, Tony Blair. There was this idea to completely double down on this. Now, I do believe that at least one aspect out of multiple was that the left thought this is a way to import new voters. So I think there's an ideological component to it. I'm sure there is a religious component to it, but I think there's also this idea. You know what? If the people of Britain will no longer vote for us, we're just going to import new voters. I do think that also played a role.
So the most important component, I mean, all that you said I agree with. The most important component is that we are ignoring the majority's will. Okay, because ever since the 60s, you're right. I wasn't even aware of this. I mean, I assumed mass migration is what really piqued people's interest in Britain. But I would have assumed that in the 70s it was such a little known thing. But to know that in the 60s you already had politicians calling it out, calling it rivers of blood. Okay, and all they've done is bring more and more, and all the people have done is complain more and more. And like you said, they just double down and just bring more. And this is just it's so mind-boggling that. And this is why, for me, I've reached the point. I'm the guy that talks about Islam. You know, I've been talking about Islam for 20 years. But if you really want to talk about the source, this is no longer Islam. The real source, the real problem is the people enabling it, the people bringing it to you, the people putting them there. Because this is not, again, the medieval era where Muslims are invading and there's nothing you can do. No, there's everything you can do. This is why we met in Hungary, you and I. That country doesn't have this problem. How hard was it? Did they have an army fighting and went to war against Muslims? No, they put a little fence. And meanwhile, you have these Western nations where the people are begging and crying for 50 years, and the government continues doing the same thing. Now, you mentioned England. You're from Austria. Was it in Austria, as we spoke in our interview, which is, I think most people are going to be amazed by this. Vienna, the once the seat of the Holy Roman Empire is now Muslim majority. At least public schools are more Muslim majority than Catholics or Austrians in general. Was it the same? And we spoke also, about the Sobieski statue and the city council saying no. So is it the same thing in Vienna, which is basically that the people from of old, from back in the 50s and 60s, actually were aware and wary and resistant to, let's say, this mass migration, the way that example you gave from the 60s, or were they not? In other words, was this an overall kind of universal European thing, which is we're not into it, even as back as the 50s and 60s, but it was suppressed and we didn't hear that? Or were there populations who were like, yeah, it's great, let's do it?
In Austria, it started in the 90s.
Okay.
There you had you can literally trace the Austrian right wing was always between 7-8% in the polls, unless they started to really focus on the migration issue, and all of a sudden they went up to 15-20%, and now they're polling at 37%. I mean, I think the UK and France was always different because they had this influx of migration due to their colonial past. Austria never had colonies, whether it was in Northern Africa or anywhere else.
So,
it
explain that to people, because this colonial thing, I mean, to Americans, most Americans don't get this, that a lot of these European countries, for example, the UK has a lot of Pakistanis because they colonized Pakistan and India, and they feel somehow beholden to them. That, oh, we colonized you, so now it's time you can come and colonize us. Like that mentality, that's a thing, right? I mean, like in France, I know they have a lot of Algerians and North Africans because they colonized those countries. So is it once again this sort of guilt, this little guilt trip that because the colonial era has been so demonized, even though it shouldn't be if you actually know what happened, and because of that, now people feel beholden and guilty, and now, okay, all you Pakistanis can now come and rape our kids because we were monsters and we colonized you 100 years ago.
I think that's absolutely the case. And yeah, I mean, there's almost I try to give a very elaborate answer, but the answer is actually quite simply yes. I mean, this idea of historic guilt, and
Which
it's
goes
again,
back, sorry to cut you off, but
yeah,
it goes back to what I was saying, which is this idea that the only person who would ever fall for this is someone who has such an overdeveloped sense of conscience. Because if I went and told Muslims, you guys did a lot of bad things to Christians for a millennium, isn't it time to treat us better? They'd kill you. So
true.
you find the one population that, because they're good and ethical and actually care, you exploit them, and exploit them by telling them you're the most horrible people ever, and they buy it.
I think that's true, but I would add, and as always, we're very cautious. I don't kind of want to generalize, but I'm wondering if there is not also, if it's not a little bit built in to Christian societies, because
Yeah.
the Christian is always looking for redemption. He's always looking for atonement, and of course, in order to atone, you need a sin. And it turns out that colonialism and imperialism was almost offering itself as and I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean, as almost the perfect sin for which we can now atone. Slavery was no longer around, so that there was the possibility, and I make this very consciously, this argument, the kind of as Jesus did, right? That you can no longer wash the feet of the servant because the servants are no longer around, but you can wash the feet of the refugee. And we had popes who actually did this, right? I think it was, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I think it was the previous pope who did
Pope
wash in the
Francis, yeah.
Vatican, Francis, yeah, the feet of Syrian refugees. So this I would say very starkly supports the point that I'm trying to make. There is always a certain pleasure, if you want, in being guilty and then atone for it, even if it comes, and what higher atonement can there be than sacrificing your civilization, sacrificing your present and your future for the sins of the past? Am I exaggerating? Absolutely. But do I think that there is a kernel of truth to this? I do think so, because you
No.
don't have these qualms in any other name one other civilization, Chinese, Japanese, Indian, Turkish, that looks back at their imperial past and says, oh my God, this is horrible. I mean, they tried to do it to Japan, but the Japanese and they were, very brutal imperial overlords wherever they set foot. But to this day, they have, I think, this shrine where prime ministers go to, I think, like the World War II generals or what it is. And let's just say that they don't have fully succumbed to this idea that imperialism was bad. And this is kind of Russia. I would argue the same thing. Whatever problems Russia has, right? This self-flagellation. Maybe it's a Catholic and Protestant thing, and the Orthodox are more resilient to it. But in the case of France and the UK and I mean, for Germany, it's the ersatz religion, right? For the Germans, it's neither Protestantism nor Catholicism. There, of course, is the Third Reich, and that means you have to do atonement to the whole world. But it's a very odd thing, and it's, to be very clear, this is publicly being said. You mentioned it, but this is being said, that you were the imperialists in the past, you were the colonialists in the past, and now you get a taste of your own medicine. But what I find so ironic about this, by saying that, they're basically admitting that colonialism is a bad thing. So it's a very odd argument to say, why are you terrified of people coming in? You did the same thing in the past and it was very bad, so it's also very bad now. But this idea that we will reach some kind of cosmic justice where there will be some form of balance, right? And we can say, oh, we were really bad in the past, but now we made up for it, and now everybody goes their separate ways. That's never going to happen. And this is, by the way, and can you know more about this than I do, but this is never how human history has worked. History is not striving towards a moral equilibrium. This is a complete, it's an interesting assumption. It's one I think that we can debate at great length from a philosophical perspective, but there's zero evidence for this. And so this attempt that one day somebody will rise up and then metaphorically shake the hands of the Europeans and say, and now your sins are forgiven. Like the scene in the Return of the King.
We've raped enough of your girls. You're okay now. You're exonerated, and you have absolution. Yeah.
Never gonna happen.
So, okay, your point about the Christianity, that's a very important point. That's a whole episode. That's a whole book, actually, which I am kind of working on. But I agree with you. All right. So I do believe that a lot of what we're seeing is in large measure, in part because of the way Christians in the West see their religion. My argument, however, is that is not true Christianity. That is a complete heresy. That is a complete aberration that has been weaponized, okay, by people who don't like Christianity to make Christians basically kill themselves. Because if you look at
post-Christian Christianity, that's what it's like.
Yes.
It's a Christianity of post-Christians. Yeah, I completely agree.
It's a post-Christianity, and if you look at the history of Christianity, man, it was robust. This wouldn't happen, okay? All throughout Europe, there were Christians, and these were Christians who were willing to die for their faith, unlike modern people. And you're not going to go into their country and rape their girls, okay? Yeah. And there's nothing in the Bible that actually advocates that. So my point is, I agree with you that one of the major, like almost fundamental problem, I call it doormat Christianity, but what I mean by that is Christianity has been turned into this idea that, your faith begins and ends with being a doormat, and all you have to do is just be complacent and acquiesce to everyone. Don't judge. Don't be confrontational. That's all evil. That's all sinful. And like I said, this is a whole different topic for another time. But in short, I'm sorry, that is not Christianity. That's not Christ's Christianity. That's not the apostles. That's not the Bibles. That's not history's Christianity. That is a sick, perverse form that is killing Western society. So when someone says, and they often do, oh, Christianity is the problem, I agree, only in the sense that it's a false form of Christianity that is completely emasculating and killing people. So, yeah, I do agree with you, but I'm hopeful that the true form of Christianity, which has intentionally been suppressed, may one day resurrect again.
No, I think that's true, and it's one of the sadder parts, I believe, particularly again in the Western world, is we have become so thoroughly materialistic. And to be very clear, I have no problem with material stuff. On the contrary, the material world is very important, but we can't even imagine any longer that there is also, let's call it the realm of the spiritual, if you want. And
the metaphysical. There's the physical and the metaphysical.
Yeah. Very good.
And exactly. We've ignored the metaphysical, and all we care about is the physical.
Yeah. And but I think both of those are important, but we completely neglect one at the expense of the other, which is this idea, then once again, that you can solve every cultural problem with more public housing and a social worker there and an extra check here. And this is just in many ways not how human beings function.
To give you a perfect example of this division between physical and metaphysical, and the fact that we in the West, even Christians, cling to the physical and completely there is no metaphysical. I'll give you a perfect example that fits into what we're talking about. So, in Britain, okay, at least if you can prove it, rape is bad because it's physical. Murder is bad if you can prove it. But because we've abandoned metaphysics, this is why, I don't know if you saw, I was talking earlier and I was saying all these girls before Muslims were in households that taught them, go ahead, have sex, go ahead, do drugs, go ahead. There is no metaphysical morality. Everything was just, go do anything as long as you don't hurt anyone, because that's all we care about, physical. And that's good. Don't hurt anyone. I'm not arguing that. But there was morality, and even Muslims understand that. And that's in part one of the reasons why they really mistreat these people, because they see them like you're an animal. I can do anything I want to. And that's in the report, okay? So I think that is really, and people will never talk about this. This is the problem. The West has abandoned morality. Okay, metaphysical morality. Its morality begins and ends in a physical construct, which means it's bad to kill, it's bad to rape, it's bad to hurt someone. But they don't tell you, like, oh yeah, it's bad to go and sleep with 10 guys when you're 10 years old. It's bad to get drunk 20, and do drugs. And they don't tell you that. And that is what feeds into this predator society that they've also brought in. And that's why I say it's such a warped symbiotic relationship where you've completely weakened one group of people by convincing them there's no metaphysics, it's all physical, and live a life of hedonism. Then you bring another group of people who are so predatory and you introduce them. It's really diabolical.
No, and you're so right. And the other problem that the state, if you want, it can no longer speak the language of the metaphysic. But of course, that
No.
is that is
Do
that
you
is
ever
very,
hear the
very
word
important.
morality? Have you ever heard a Western politician, say the word morality or honor, okay, or being noble or acting dignified? I mean, these were words that actuated wars historically. Do we even know what that means anymore? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, this is why you end up with, and again, no personal attack, but this is then how you end up with, from a moral perspective, whether it's Bill Clinton or Donald Trump, right? I guess you could even at least when it comes to women, I think probably JFK also falls slightly into the category. No, that this is very true, and that also feeds into this weird idea then that ultimately the state can only be a neutral arbiter among different groups that all have an equal claim to truth. So it's the state then all of a sudden is no longer supposed to take any side. And I think this is just not a sustainable model, right? Because as we just discussed, and as kind of also based on this report, if you have one culture that says that, treating women like chattel is fine, and another one that says no, it's not, then the government or the state cannot say, well, whatever's your cup of tea, we don't really care. And and Americans know this very well. I know there are multiple layers and dimensions to the American Civil War, but I think ultimately it was, you cannot be a unified state where one half is pro-slavery and the other half is against it. Again, I know there is more. I know there is more to this, but if we take this simplified version, and I think, of course, again, the same is, this is when people don't understand. We need to distinguish between multi-ethnic societies and multicultural societies.
Mm-hmm.
You can be multi-ethnic but monocultural, and that is not a problem. Switzerland has 4 ethnicities. I would say that Germany has more than one ethnicity. Just compare somebody from Hamburg to somebody from Munich. If you run around in lederhosen in northern Germany, they think you have lost your mind. So there is a difference, but I think they're culturally the same. I think the United Kingdom is multi-ethnic, Scottish, Welsh, English, but they are in certain areas monocultural. So you then can have an army where Scots and Welsh and English fight side by side, whether it's World War I or World War II. And I don't fear a multi-ethnic society, but I do fear a multicultural society, because for me, there is no historical evidence that they have ever worked, at least not in a democratic system, right? Because at some point, then the government has to suppress some cultures and favor others. But
I agree with you completely, and I think the problem is they've convinced people that the word culture means different cuisine, different dress, different attire. Actually, the word culture, the word culture, if you really look at it, it's it's a way of thinking, it's a way of life, it's priorities, it's what's the first things, it's based on religion. So how is it good to be multicultural? And I agree with you. You can be multi-ethnic, which is to say you can have all different races, but if they share the same priorities, worldview, standards, ethics, okay, it's fine. Well, what difference does it make what his skin color is if he thinks like you and shares your values? But if you bring in, different people and they have different cultures, you know what that means? Oh, okay, so one culture called Islam thinks women are chattel, thinks men beat their wives, thinks men can rape and enslave infidels because they're not Muslim, and all that sort of thing. And then you have another culture, which of course thinks all of that is anathema. So how is it ever smart to take all these different worldviews, religious priorities, and put them together? What's going to happen? What's going to happen is precisely what we're seeing. And to show you the example even more pronouncedly, if you look at, again, the point of culture is like worldviews, priorities, and all that sort of thing. So you can look at, let's say, America or even England, and just look at the white population. Some are leftist, some are rightist, and they hate each other, but they're the same culture. They are racially homogenous, but I'm not the same culture, they're the same race. But because they're culturally different, which is to say, not that they eat different food, but they see the world differently, well, they hate each other. If you ever hear how, like, the left and the woke talk about Trump and MAGA and vice versa. So it has nothing to do with your skin color or your pigmentation or racial or eye features. But the word culture, that is a problem. You don't want different cultures among you because that's chaos.
No, I agree, and I would even go a step further. But this is open for debate. But for me, the first starting point for any culture, you said priorities, and I like that very much. And for me, it's a priority of affection. So when somebody would ask me, okay, fine, Ralph, so then what is German culture? What is Austrian culture? What is British culture? It's kind of, for me, the first answer would be, it is a sense of affection and belonging to a nation, to a country, and its history. And if you don't have this, right, every other step along the way, you start with this affection and you end up with fish and chips. But if you don't have the first step, you don't really get to the last one. And you can have a situation. This is why I do have to admit that I do see parts of the left as part of an alien culture, because, again, some of them, because they do not share and openly reject that sense of affection. And so you cannot make the argument the essence of British culture is to hate Britain. I mean, I guess you can, but only for a very, very short period of time. And that's for me always the key thing. When there is then always the argument, or again, this goes back to what we said about the metaphysical thing. We think in such physical terms that we forget how important the emotional component is as well. So we then say it's nature, or la France profonde, right? It's something that we can touch. But no, it is, and it's fine to say that it's a feeling. When I think of Germany, when I think of Austria, it does something to me. I think in a good way. It's a sense. I look at the history and I feel it. I perceive it, the good and the bad, as my history. Like I cheer the successes. I lament the losses, and I regret the mistakes that were made, in a way that I do not, for example, for Turkey, because it's not mine. Like I have no problem with Turkey, but I don't have this sense of affection. I have it for Britain, I have it for America, right? It's like concentric circles where I have this sense. But we have a growing number of people within our countries who do not share that sentiment, and that is a problem. It's very difficult to have solidarity within a society, or common sense, if people no longer feel that they have something in common. This was the main reason what shocked me so much during the whole BLM thing, and whatever one thinks about it, the kneeling during the American anthem. If a society cannot even agree on something, to say we all show the same amount of respect towards the flag and the anthem, and then we discuss all the policy issues, I think it's very, very difficult to keep a country together under such conditions. So I am to just as a quick add-on. The test of a society, or the idea is not that a society never goes through a crisis. There are always crises. There were crises in the 19th century, in the 20th. Like it's. I think it's part of the human experience. The question is, do you survive them, and do you come out stronger at the end? That is the big question. And I'm no longer sure if our societies are as resilient as they have been in the past. That's my biggest worry. I mean, it remains maybe.
How did they weaken? What do you think made them weaker? You said they were stronger in the past, and I completely agree with you. None of what we're seeing would have happened in the past. Why have they weakened to this state, do you think? Because it's obviously a philosophical development. Maybe even theological.
I think we have to line up a whole series of podcasts as we go.
I know it's late for you, and you've shared a lot. We can wrap it up now for you if you'd like.
No. I love these topics. No, I love these topics. I can go on for another. I'm just worried that your viewers will start tuning out. I think that these.
No.
These are the fundamental questions, and I would argue that something that for millennia, I think we took completely as normal this idea that the human individual is part of a group and that the group can put certain demands on the individual and vice versa, right? It's a symbiosis between the individual and the collective, if you want. We have completely given up on the collective side. So the idea that you might, hopefully you never have to, but that there might be a point in time where you have to go out, pick up a gun, and fight, kill, and die for your country was seen as terrible, but normal and sometimes warranted. Nowadays, it seems almost, it seems almost perverse. It seems, why would you kill yourself or get killed for your country? What's the benefit? What do you
Violence
get
is
out
never
of
the answer.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. And this is, again, I'm not wishing for it. I think it's I hope I've been in the military. I hope I never get drafted and never have to fight in a war. But for a very long time, this was seen as normal, whether it was for your tribe, whether it was for your country, whatever, whichever entity you ultimately fought for, because it was understood that there is this this give and take, if you want, between the group and the individual. And I'm not a collectivist. Don't get me wrong. But this was, I think, a very, very important element. And we have these glimpses. I give you a concrete example. If you look at the behavior of particularly men on the Titanic, on the HMS Birkenhead, on the Lusitania, right? This whole women and children first was not just something that existed on paper. For the most part, it was actually, when the test came, right, when the ships sunk, most men, not all of them, but most, lived up to those standards. Compare this with ship tragedies, the Costa Concordia, or there was a ferry in Finland, how men behaved in in these more recent cases, where they stepped over children, where they pushed women out of the way. So some of the nostalgia of the past is warranted. These were different societies. Right? It was completely common in World War I that the sons of the nobility fought in the front lines, and many of them died. Right? So this, because it was seen as a duty, it was seen as an obligation towards your country. Now, some people might say this is old-fashioned, this is reactionary. That might all be true, but it made for a very, very, very strong nation. It made for the very nations that gave us the modern world. And I think we have lost that. Once again, I'm not promoting a war or something, but there was a time when a significant part of the population, particularly the upper classes, did live up to the standards that were expected from them. Not all of them, but many. I mean, Gertrude Himmelfarb has written about, I think she died recently, but she has written wonderfully about this. And there is a difference. As I said, I don't want to glorify the past too much, but there are these elements.
You're actually saying something. I just wrote an article. I did a video, but I wrote an article that came out today. So let me be, and it really jibes with what you just said. So let me summarize it to you and see if you agree with it, which is basically, okay, 250 years ago was the American Revolution, the War of Independence. And if you look at it, okay, so you had colonists who were mostly British subjects of England, and you had the British monarchy. And okay, long story short, they got into a quarrel. What was it about? It was about taxation without representation. That was the heart of it. Okay, tea taxes, a little political overreach and whatnot. Okay, and for that, the founders of America went to war. Okay, they killed, they died, they pillaged and plundered. They were pillage and plunder war. Okay, for those reasons. Now, growing up in America, I was taught they were heroes, okay? And we still celebrate them. Now, okay, keep that paradigm in mind. And now let's fast forward to England 250 years later. Again, British government and subject peoples. If you look at what's happening, the things that we're talking about, just this grooming sexual business alone, okay? So we already summarized it. The government bringing in, okay, so to summarize it, now imagine instead of it was a tea tax and political stuff, the British crown was doing this. It was sending loads and loads of Muslims and Pakistanis, people from alien cultures, to America. And these Muslims started raping their children and molesting them and horrific stuff, okay, and abusing the system and just creating basically terrorism. And then when the Americans are like, what on earth are you doing? The British actually doubled down some more. Okay. If they went to war for what they did, What do you think? How do you think they would have responded in this current climate? And after you answer that question, answer to me why then are the Brits not responding that way? Because in the end, we have to come up with one conclusion. Either the American heroes were actually horrible warmongers and insurrectionists and rabble rousers and deplorables, or Britain's people are just cowards. There's only one or the other. So, what do you think?
Well, I mean, this is a good question. Well, I would begin with the what I find most remarkable and admirable about the American Revolution is that if you look at the actual numbers in and this supports the argument, right? In 1776, it is very hard to show that a majority of the colonists actually wanted independence. What happened was that you had a group of very dedicated people right around the founding fathers who more or less forced everyone to go along with them, or a significant number then people moved to Canada who wanted to remain part of the realm of Her Majesty. But the comparison is a good one because it tells me that I guess the British were just as surprised as they are now with things that's happening within their own country. That all of a sudden you have this group of warmongers or rebel rousers who are
Mhm.
just no longer willing to get along with the program. In addition to this, however, I would say when we take something like the grooming gangs, I don't believe this would have been on that scale. I don't believe this would have been possible in the 19th century or in the 18th century, because the kind of pressure towards conformity that was applied onto society was one that would have made this almost unthinkable. I mean, I give you a very concrete example. I always find this quite fascinating. I think up until, because it fits so nicely with the grooming gang issue, I
Mhm.
believe up until the mid 17th, early 18th century, I think even a little
Mhm.
bit later. Some numbers say it was more than 50%. Let us be more generous, say it was below 50% of prostitutes in London were below the age of 14. So it was more or less legal pedophilia. I think that's the only way to
Mhm.
describe it. And then what happened was that all of a sudden you had groups of people within the English society, and some of them they said were picking up falling angels and whatever you want to call it, who said this is not right, and everybody who thinks is this is right basically will teach them that it isn't, and then they changed society. And what they ultimately created, which I still find is one of the greatest creation ever to be made, was the British gentleman, right?
Mhm.
The whole enchilada. Like, well, I guess they didn't have much Mexican food at the time, but you know what I mean, right?
Mhm.
This idea that there is a certain code of conduct, ideally independent of your socioeconomic status, that you should try to live up to. And this is, I have a lot of nostalgia for this, so I may be exaggerating slightly in the positive direction, but this was there. It is to me absolutely fascinating to observe how surprisingly stable the Western nations were in times of tremendous political, social, and demographic upheaval. I mean, there was, as I said before, there were many crises, but ultimately they managed them quite well, because there was a crisis of migration. Very often it was emigration, not immigration, although in the United States you had both. There was an explosion in population. There was the industrial revolution, the emergence of the working class, and yet somehow, despite all these changes, I would say that we came out of it as a more kind of as a morally better society than we went into it. It all then went to shambles after World War One, right? And we can talk about this as well. But this is quite impressive. I think the reason, I think Western history is remarkable in the way it dealt with crises, and very often came out better on the other end. And there was this moral element to it. I think lots of and these were, to be very clear, these elements were fed by Christianity. I mean, this
Mhm.
this is the other big problem, right? I think this is what
Yeah.
and we talked about as well. This is what I sometimes accuse the Enlightenment of, and I have a lot of patience for the Enlightenment. But what the
I
Enlightenment
don't.
did, yeah, what it did, it took Christianity, stripped God away and then tried to put it on a purely rational footing. And I think we now experience the failing of this, because
Mhm.
Christian morality does, whether the the God element is a very important one. I mean, we ran the experiment. I mean, this was the big question, right, that Francis Fukuyama asked in his End of History. That he said, is it possible that you discover certain moral rules through Christianity, but then everybody can have them and apply them even without the Christian underpinning? And I think we are increasingly coming to the answer, and the answer is no.
Yeah, I agree. That's I think that's how this experiment has gone awry. We were told that, look, you Christians can believe your spiritual, theological mumbo jumbo. Go ahead. But the ethical system's good and we're going to adopt it without it. Okay. Like being, and this, okay. So, and this is where you get all these ideas, which we have to be nice to the Pakistanis and the Muslims. We were bad to them. Now it's our turn. Okay. So that's the stripped portion. But when you do that, because it loses balance, okay, it loses meaning because God is truth now, and this is what leads to relativism. So when you strip it like that of its actual theological context, then this is now when you're left with relativism, and if anything, you get abused and you get exploited, and that's exactly what we're seeing happening to formerly Christian populations in Britain and in Europe in general, because they have the residue, the residual leftovers of Christianity, but they don't have the frame, okay, that holds it together. And I think they're being exploited and they're dying for it. And it's but I actually think it's kind of amazing that despite all the hard work of the powers that be to secularize people, it seems to me that there is kind of a return to a robust form of Christianity, which to me is the only form of Christianity that ever really existed, like authentic Christianity. I'm seeing that a lot with a lot of young men, a lot of young women who realize that all our problems kind of go back to that. If we would reclaim our heritage, our religious heritage, and our morality first and foremost, like I said, all these problems could not be. Okay, if you had, if you brought the same elements in Britain, the same evil authorities in government, and they are okay, and you brought the same Muslims and the Pakistanis, and they thought the same way, but it was 100 years earlier, or even 200 years, and you had that culture, nothing would happen except the Pakistanis would get in line and be very nice and just drive taxis and not do anything else. Okay, so a lot of it has to do with just the watering down the culture and the exploitation of the little leftover part of Christianity, which is, oh, I have to be nice, I have to just treat everyone nicely and don't judge and just fall down and walk all over me, and it's very masochistic, it's very disgusting, it's very unappealing. I don't blame that so many. I often hear people are leaving the church. I don't blame them because that's not a church. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. That
Yeah.
is so very true. No, that
Yeah.
I have this is again. It's these days. It's being a Catholic is very difficult these days. I have to
Yeah.
admit, because how can you believe in a church that at least some of its most prominent representatives have lost the beliefs themselves? It's
Exactly. And this is the Catholic Church, which was
yeah.
once headed by, I mean, this is who launched the Crusades, okay, because they cared about the defense of Christians, even even overseas.
And I think it
So
was Pope Francis who once again, I don't mean to speak ill of anybody who's no longer with us, but he said that Christianity is not the only way towards salvation. Well, I
oh yeah,
think,
yeah,
listen, it's fine if I say that or if somebody else says that, but the Pope probably shouldn't. I mean, this is like you join I don't know, a New York Knicks fan club, and the president of the fan club says, I mean, you can cheer for the New York Knicks, but you don't really
yeah,
have to. If you like another
exactly,
team better, that's
exactly.
also fine.
Yeah. You're the one guy in the world who should be like, stick with us, everyone else is wrong. And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, go ahead, dude, do whatever you want. I mean, honestly, look, if we call ourselves Christians, and it's time for us to realize that the Christian element and component is part of politics, and we're seeing it right now. It's easy, and we were taught to, like, oh, keep your religion to yourself, but politics is a secular thing. But man, the more I look at it, the more it just reflects a sort of warfare, a spiritual warfare, that was foretold from of old, that is recorded. I've said this before. The main thing that's ever brought me back towards Christianity has been looking at the world and saying, like, wow, this is exactly what the Bible is talking about, even though most people don't even interpret it that way. They're caught up in, like, oh, I have to say a formula about Jesus and resurrection. Okay, but if you really look at it, it's kind of like everything is and the lies, the deception. This is what I deal with, especially the historical lies. When you look at history and how it's being taught, it's not just that something's omitted. It's like everything is upside down, and you're being fed a complete revert. Not it's not correct. It's the exact reversal of the truth. So in my field, Islam and Christians, everyone is taught, oh yeah, Muslims were good guys until the Christians came and ruined it all. Oh, it's actually the opposite. The Muslims conquered all their lands and killed them and abused them for centuries. And then you had the Crusades. And what I'm saying is, this is just one element. So imagine if you did a deep dive, and I'm already starting to do that, in different aspects of history, and their lies too. And they deal with more important and deeper topics that actually affect societies and civilizations. And they're all lied. They're all lies. And this is why Europeans and Westerners and Americans imbibe this in their youth, because they're indoctrinated, because public school systems are indoctrination systems, public TV's indoctrination, and they're told all the lies, and so they become jaundiced and they hate their own heritage, and then they try to make it up to everyone, and they think life is about being liberal and enjoying it and being promiscuous, and then lo and behold, what happens. It's so this is what I'm trying to say. It's like, it's such an orchestrated, diabolical, intentional thing. I can no longer see what's happening as just, oh, this is politics, this is just circumstances, it's not guided. It is.
No, this has been. I would argue this has been going on for quite a while. It was Nietzsche who says there are three types of history, right? There's monumental history, antiquarian history, and critical history. And I think precisely what you said, he lays it out quite nicely, at least when he talks about history. I think Nietzsche makes this wonderful point that is, you can do history as going to the archives and just try to identify the historical record. But then, of course, there's also history as an inspiration. So you admire the past as an obligation towards the future, that you say you want to aspire to be like a George Washington or Winston Churchill, or take your pick. And then there's this third kind of thing we have now, which is critical history, which just tries to tear everything down. But going back to what you said before about the American founding, but of course, if I tear down the heroes of the past, I no longer have any aspiration to be a hero in the future. And this is, I think, a massive, massive problem. There have been individuals, I would argue, that truly have been larger than life. And if you look at the biography of George Washington, he is an absolutely remarkable figure. Or as George III, who was basically his antagonist, said, probably one of the greatest men who've ever lived. It's 100% true. These people, these individuals, both male and female, they do exist. But by negating their existence, we are basically saying there have never been heroes in the past, so there will never be heroes in the future. The world is just how it is, and it can never change. And you demoralize. I mean, this is, for me, the biggest issue. The degree of demoralization we experience in our societies is beyond the pale. And for me, this is one of the biggest. And I think relativism is just another term for this. I think relativism is both the cause but also a consequence of this demoralization. Because if everybody's the same, if all the things that we consider to be elevating, to be inspiring, are just made up, well, then what's the point? And how often do you hear young people say this these days? Yeah, what's the point? But you cannot live your life by that. This is not a horizon to strive towards. If you say, nah, as I said, what's the point? There needs to be a point. And whether you find it in, again, I find it in this, I guess the term is, I think the term has been abused, so I have to be careful when I use it, but in a form of Christian nationalism, right? I think that God did create nations, and this is an obligation for us. And I take comfort and the calling in saying it is so important that, in essence, these nations continue to exist. I understand that Austria will be different in 200 years than it is now, but I want it to be a natural evolution. I don't want it to be replaced by something completely differently. I think civilizations that die out, I think, Egypt is a very good example. I think that Egyptian traditional, if you want, antique Egyptian civilization is no longer with us in a sense, I think is quite tragic. And, there are a lot of, I guess, good things that have
Yeah,
replaced
it's
it as well.
completely Arabized. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Your point though about the taking down of heroes, I think this is very important. This was the reason I wrote my book Defenders of the West, and I
yeah,
looked at all these different Christian European heroes, who ironically, if you listen to the popular history or if you watch movies about them, are they're portrayed as like really unsavory types, like King Richard Lionheart, of course, another Brit. And when you look at the actual primary contemporary sources, these people were just amazing. They're full of faith, full of courage, full of just perseverance and sacrifice, and all the sorts of things that Western people, as Christians especially, when they read, it's just so mobilizing, so inspiring, and it's real. Oftentimes these stories, as I say, often the lives of these men, what Hollywood comes up with, which is fake, it has nothing on it. The stuff that these guys went through, which is recorded, could make a blockbuster, amazing movie,
oh,
and it would be real. It would actually be grounded in the sources, but they will never do it because it will actually make Americans and Europeans and Christian heritage people actually get inspired and actuated by their faith. And so that's completely shut down. So overall, my ultimate point is, you're right that the West has a long tradition of heroes and men who sacrifice, and women, but they've been intentionally, and this is why I always go back and say this is by design. They've been all intentionally scrubbed and taken down and erased and demonized, because you, as a European, as a Westerner, have no one ever to look up to, because they're all evil, they're all racist, and and now you need to make it up to the entire world. And this is again once more why I just say it's really diabolical what's happening. I can no longer, like I did a few years ago or a decade ago, think this is just natural developments. It's just so guided. It's so always the absolute worst way, that it's evil.
I think that's true, but I would just add it goes further back than we're often willing to admit. Just to give a concrete example, if you take somebody like John Locke, right, who speaks about reasonable Christianity, which is basically a watered down form of Christianity. So
Yeah.
a lot, when correctly people say a lot of this is by design, I agree, but the design is much because there's the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan and all of this. I think the design goes back much
Yeah,
further.
yeah,
You
no, no,
can
I agree with you. I think what's happening is, I think it goes back centuries. I think it goes back millennia, but I think it's accelerating because the more that people give in, and I think a lot of it has to do with the modern form of technology, which
yes.
has really seeped in and indoctrinated people in a way that it could not 100 years ago, because everything I know is what I see in my local village. You know what I mean? But now people are just born, and all they know is what they see on a screen, and it goes into their head. So I do believe it's very old, but I think it's really accelerated in the modern era due especially to technology.
I mean, the idea, you're absolutely right. I mean, I would add as an argument, the idea, if you go back to John Locke, Thomas Hobbes and others, and I believe that I actually like Hobbes quite a bit. I think they were well intended. Was that if we
Leviathan.
may, yeah, if we make if we make relativism in a sense, the law of the land or the culture of the day. If you mentioned this before, right? There were times when people fought over flags, they fought over ideas, they fought over beliefs. Now, if you could make everyone believe that there is nothing worth fighting for, that it's that life is all there is, that you can only enjoy the present time,
The only
like
thing
it says.
worth fighting for is freedom for me to be promiscuous, eat junk food, and do drugs and drink alcohol.
Yeah,
Because that today is what freedom means, right?
yes, you
Who's
absolutely.
gonna
And
fight
here's
and die for that? Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. And I think this is where they were wrong. I still believe they were well intended. This is where they were, because it turns out that it is somewhat empty. All right,
Yeah.
it is having four wives and four cheeseburgers every day. It's not the same, because you mentioned, I mean, if you take the Persian Wars, right, and you read what Herodotus writes about the phalanx, and he describes how the soldiers march forward and how many of them soil themselves, and yet they keep on marching. It's something you say, I, no, I don't want to experience it, but there is a part of me that says, I wonder if faced with potential death, if this isn't the moment where you feel the most alive. Again, I'm not trying, but you know what
It's
I
it's
mean, right?
it's
That
fighting for something greater than
yes,
yourself, which we're not
that's it.
taught anymore because our
Yes,
self is the greatest thing, and it's
that's
not worth
perfect.
fighting
Yes,
for.
yeah.
You see? All right, Ralph. I know it's really late for you, and I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining me. We'll do it
Thanks for
again.
having me. This was amazing.
Yeah. It's always great talking with you. I'll contact you again. We'll do it again. I might do a part two, and we can go from there. So thanks for staying up for me, and good night.
Anytime. Thanks to you, and thanks to all your
Yeah.
viewers and listeners.
All right. Awesome. Take care.
Take care.
Bye. Okay, that was Ralph Scholhammer. Be sure to check him out. Follow him on his Twitter, X, Facebook. Great guy. I met him in when I was in Budapest, and he's Austrian, and he's based in Vienna, which is very close to Budapest. And yeah, the man definitely gets it. So there it is. You got a good lay of the land. Like I said, I brought him on right when I had finished the halfway point of this report. So I will do another live stream about the more important part, which is the Islamic doctrine, the Islamic connection, Islamic history, the continuity that nobody knows about, which in short is that all the stuff that's happening to the British women and the grooming gangs actually happened over 1,000 years ago, and even at the hands of Muhammad himself. Okay, for the same reasons. So this is one of I think my contributions, which I will bring forth in a later stream, probably maybe in a couple days, or definitely no later than next week. We will do it. And let me take some final um, super chats. And I hope you guys found this edifying. Pop the kettle on love. Rape gangs in Sydney 2000s. White guys got involved forcefully. Aussies are tough. Good. Because someone has to be tough. And apparently the authorities in a lot of Western countries are not tough when they're not in cahoots with, the rapists. Kian Kum. I was so angry when I heard these documents that I had to go to the gym and vent, but it still wasn't enough. I pray for God to temper my heart and steel my hand. England, become the crusaders you once were. Deus vult. Seriously, England was once the home of one of the major homes of the crusaders. You just maybe heard me talk about Richard the Lionheart, right? Literally one of the most famous, if not the most famous. He's the most famous crusader in the Middle East. I'll tell you that. He's the most notorious crusader in the Middle East. I've said this before. My parents from Egypt, Coptic Christians, when I was born here in the United States, their names are with R's, as are my siblings. So they wanted to give me an R name. And this is an old fashioned tradition that lots of old world people do, but they pick names and they put candles and they light the candles and they put the names under it. 3, 4 names, I don't know. And then the candle that stays lit with that name becomes your name. And this phone, and hate it. The name that there were the two name the name that won for me was Richard, and then the second name was Raymond. And my father from Egypt was like, yeah, we can't call him Richard. If we ever go back, they're gonna kill him. And his point was, which is true, that Richard is like such a hated name in the Islamic world because of Richard the Lionheart. Okay, once a proud English crusader. I wonder how he would have reacted if he knew about what's going on. England is bringing in all these Muslims who are openly raping women, and the authorities are basically covering it up because they might get called a name. Flippy. In the UK, it's believe all women unless the rapist is a Muslim. Good point, huh? Yeah, there's a hierarchy. White man, evil. White woman can imprison and destroy white man, but not Muslim man because he can actually get away with it. And yeah, there's nothing to say anymore. Joe, thanks for joining. Lies destroy lives. Going the extra mile means suffering to do what's right. It does not mean giving evil people whatever they want. Confusion about this and other things among Christians has caused much harm. Absolutely. There's this idea, which I alluded to, which is, oh, to be a Christian is to basically appease and capitulate, don't judge. That's not in the Bible, man. It's not in the New Testament. Paul talks about have nothing to do with the works of evil, but rather expose them, call them out. All right. And Western society is all about works of evil, and we all acquiesce because we think that's being a good Christian. No, it's being a coward. And that's what makes it even worse. So many people who think they're good Christians are just cowards, and they're trying to justify it by saying, "Oh, I'm not judging." No, it's harder to actually do the right thing and be confrontational and get in the way and do what these do, put a report like this together. That's the harder thing, actually. And Christians should and have historically done the harder thing. Leo Wolf the Red, this inquiry convinced me that Vlad III was justified in his response to the Turks. This is evil, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening here. Of course, it's happening here. It's happening everywhere in the West. The only reason we're even hearing about it in Britain is because it is so egregious and obscene and endemic and ubiquitous. All right. Whereas everywhere else in the West, it's on its way to being there, which means you're not going to hear about it because that's still not enough. John, I had a video taken down I posted 3 years ago because it talked about certain people in government, and there was a part that said we need to rise up and contact our representatives. YouTube called it hate speech. That's probably why I'm being suppressed with all my, so-called warmongering, huh? Well, maybe you're warning me, huh? Okay, well, thanks. Good point. Anything is now hate speech. Here's something. Let me tell you what hate speech is at this point of the day. Okay. And I was thinking about this today. This is very important. I was thinking about it not in the context of hate speech. We know about hate speech, but something similar. I was looking at that video of that African guy who was trying to behead some fellow in Belfast a week or two ago. And there's a video of him. It's not really that graphic. He's like sitting on top of him, and it seems like he's trying to carve his head off, but luckily, happily, he didn't. And everyone was up in arms. Oh, you can't see that. It will traumatize people. Oh, this is just, people will be traumatized. Okay. So, on the one hand, we can say that they don't want us to see it because they don't want us to know the truth, which is, of course, what I think and what any rational person will think. But one of their excuses, which a lot of people will believe, is no, this is traumatic. And you'll even see in the warning, they'll give you 10 warnings. Do you want to see this? This is violent. And now here's my thing. If we really care about people being traumatized by these videos, why do we actually create movies that are 100 times worse with violence? The kind of violence that doesn't even exist. Okay. We put it in people's heads, in movies, in video games, in all sorts of things. I don't think we really care about traumatizing people. All right. I think it. So when you hear that, oh yeah, people shouldn't see this because it might really upset you. Well, yeah, but our culture is based on showing us the most vile things imaginable that don't even happen. So one mild thing that did happen, and you're worried about people getting traumatized. No, that's perfect evidence that you are just trying to cover it up because you're a big fat liar. Debbie Fuller, Canadian of Norwegian, Irish, and Scottish descent. Ready to go full Viking if need be. Following you for years and appreciate the endeavors. Well, thank you, Debbie. Yes, gird your loins, if you will, and yeah, that's good. That's good stock. It's also the kind of stock that certain people want to rape. So be on guard, but I'm sure you are. Lies destroy lives. Enoch Powell made the mistake of making it about race. If he focused on hostile religions, we wouldn't have these problems now. Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to the idea of culture. Culture is almost synonymous with things like religion and philosophy. Okay. It's not about race to me. Look, you can be any race, but it's where you're born, where you're raised, and what your influences are that ultimately are going to mold your epistemology. Okay. And you see this all the time. It's but religions are ideas. They mold your epistemology too. You could be white, black, whatever, but if you're of that religion, which is to say you're of a way of thinking, a way of prioritizing the world, well, there it is. You will act that way, whether it's Christianity or Islam or anything in between. Don't take my bacon, lady. That's a good one. Other than working on my relationship with God, how do I, as an Englishman, fight back against this nonsense when I'm surrounded by all this craziness? Yeah, I know. I'm sometimes very critical about Englishmen, and I don't mean that, and Western men in general. I'm just being critical because, it's just, I understand, though, as an individual, what can you do? And I'm not telling you as an individual, go do something crazy because they'll imprison you. So yeah, obviously it has to be collective and intelligent and done in a very smart way. But having said that, it's very clear that the current channels that are supposed to work, that were guaranteed work, are not working. All right. So hopefully enough men and women understand this, to the point that the sheer numbers are enough to warrant change one way or the other. Tecton Knights. This discussion is so needed. I have tried diving into this rabbit hole, and honestly, it's becoming more clear that it's some kind of very powerful and wealthy syndicate hiring these corrupt politicians. I don't know if it's Freemasons. I don't know. I agree with you, and happily, I don't know either. The good news is this. A lot of people want to talk about a hidden hand in the background, and honestly, I think it's irrelevant, and I'll tell you why. Because the only good thing about our system that's left is that we know where the buck stops with when it comes to policy making and authorities. We know who's making these decisions. Okay, Starmer in Britain, isn't he the top guy? Right. So I don't care if there's someone behind him. He has the power to do what he does. He's the one that makes the policies. He's responsible. Whether he's being bribed, whether he's being blackmailed, that's kind of not my problem. You're the guy who's doing this, and you need to be held responsible. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, because it really allows us to focus. Every human being is influenced and by all sorts of forces in the background, but we know who's responsible for policy in the United States, in Europe. We know their names. Okay, you know who they are. That's where the buck stops with why they're doing it, whether they're in cahoots with, something shady above and beyond them. I mean, it's good to know, obviously, but it is irrelevant in a sense, because they're the ones who make the decision. They don't have to do it. They're in power. They're the ones who initiate policy. Whether they're doing it because they're being influenced or not doesn't interest me. You're held responsible. And if you're doing something that is so obviously counterproductive and trying to get people killed, okay, well, we need to call you out for that. Lies destroy lives. I said I wouldn't ask for a shout out for the Raymond Ibrahim, Dan Barwami, and Mark Dury group on another platform until we reach 5,000. Nowhere near it. Slow going. Okay. So are you calling for a shout out, or is this good or bad? All right. Well, thanks for sharing. And if you want to call a shout out, have at it. Don't take my bacon, lady. There is no morality without God. That's the main problem. Yeah, I think it's true. I think a lot of atheists will act and argue like, oh, yeah, you can be moral without God. Who cares? Why? But you know what? In practice, we're not seeing it, are we? Ever since God was removed from the public sphere, everyone's become immoral. Why can't we be atheists who are moral? And I know some will argue with me and say, yeah, I'm moral, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, look at the trajectory of society. It's immoral. Okay. And even Most of them won't even say they're atheists. Most of them will tell you I'm agnostic or I'm kind of Christian, and it's immoral. Don't take my bacon, lady. Multiculturalism has 100% failed here. Without one dominant culture, there is constant tension. Yeah. And that you will understand that once you understand what the word culture means. It doesn't mean Thai cuisine or, some exotic food and dress. It actually means an entire way of life, way of thinking. So why would you want 10 different ways of thinking and priorities and ways of life living next to each other? You think that's going to create harmony? Lies destroy lives. Raymond, please consider interviewing Mark Dury. I think his book, The Third Choice, is the most persuasive book when trying to reach the educated. Sure, I think I know Mark Dury, and I don't know if I did interview him or if I tried to before and it didn't work out, but I'm certainly open to it. You're on a roll, Mister Don't Take My Bacon Lady. You're talking so much sense right now, fellas. Yeah, we are, aren't we? All right, I'm going to stop saying your name. We have been brainwashed, Raymond. Yes, we have, but speak for yourself because I won't be part of this first person plural business. I mean, the brainwashing is extensive, but really, no. Lies destroy lives. If one believes that the punishment is hell is ultimately redemptive, they will view the death penalty differently to those who think the suffering is endless. See George MacDonald's sermon on justice. Yeah, that's one of the greatest sermons. And that's a good point, actually. I actually believe hell is redemptive. It's not punitive. Um, and that is what punishment should be. It's not about, oh, I'll show you. I mean, you can think that if you want, but it's a way of teaching a person a lesson. Okay. If you're not punished, why would I learn? All right. This is why children and young kids need to be disciplined. All right. If they're not punished, then well, I don't know what's there to learn. All right. Don't take my bacon, lady. Who's this woman to try to take your bacon? Secular friends don't know that the reason they have morals is because we are Christians. Pray for a revival. No, they don't. I've always said this. Everything that is like secular humanism is 100% based on Christianity. Why did secular humanism rise in the West? Well, because of its Christian background. Why didn't Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Shintoists and pagans become secular humanists? Coincidence? I think not. I think it's because Christianity paved the way for that thinking. How do I join this struggle practically? Well, keep watching, keep talking, read some of my books. Sword and Scimitar, Defenders of the West, Two Swords of Christ, etc., etc. And then you'll definitely be up to speed with what we're all about here. Lives destroy lives. Raymond, if you haven't already, please make it so only subscribers to your channel can comment. Are there problems again? I'm supposed to have moderators today. I will look into it. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Lies destroy lives. If politicians are not prepared to sacrifice themselves, friends, and family for the sake of their country, they shouldn't be politicians. Well, I'll go a step further and I'll say everyone who calls for war should actually be involved in war or have their children in war. I'm tired of seeing people who want war and they don't have any skin in the game. If you really believe in it, why don't you be part of it? Honestly, I would. If there's a war I'm dead set on, I will get into it or push one of my sons or something Lies destroy lives. If politicians are not prepared to sacrifice themselves for, oh, I'm sorry, I read that. I think we have come to the end. Okay. There's this thing in my way. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a long one, and we went through this report, at least literally we went through the first half. I will do another part two because the best is yet to come. I'm sorry to call it the best. The most disgusting is yet to come, actually. The most shocking and deplorable is yet to come. We're going to look at the specific Islamic doctrines and the historical continuity that we're talking about, stretching back to Muhammad. And we will look even closer because the report really gets into it deeply. The state's failures, which we touched on today. So we will develop it some more. So thank you all for joining me on this fine Friday afternoon. Go have some fun, relax. By fun, my standard of fun is just kind of relaxing and unwinding. So go do that. Don't do anything kind of stupid that'll get you into a grooming gang situation. Okay, one last one. 19 kilometers. Looked through the inquiry and I'm just disgusted seeing that these monsters share the same background as you, and now it feels like you're gonna clean up a mess you didn't ask for. Best wishes to the victims. Yeah, that is exactly it. All right, 19 kilometers. We will continue this conversation, and all of you, again, thanks for joining me. Like I said, this is an important topic, and it's worse than you think, and there's a lot more to flesh out. So please join me whenever my next live stream may be. It might be in a couple days. I'll post it, and you'll see it, and we will go from there. So in the meantime, take care. Goodbye. Am I still on? Sorry.